Order. We now come to the first Opposition Day motion in the name of the Leader of the Opposition. To move the motion, I call Mr. Jamie Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the motion in my name and the name of my right honourable and honourable friends. Now, I want honourable members across the House to cast their minds back to the week commencing 14th of July 2013. The country was still basking in Andy Murray's historic win at Wimbledon. England had just embarked on a successful Ashes series against Australia, and hospital A&E departments achieved the target to see 95% of patients within 4 hours. Since then, a number of unlikely things have happened. The then reigning world champion Spain crashed out of the World Cup in the first round. A group of scientists remotely landed a probe on a comet hundreds of millions of kilometres from Earth, and Cuba and the United States began to repair diplomatic relations. But in the same period, some sadly predictable things have occurred. England crashed out of the World Cup in Brazil, were whitewashed by Australia in the cricket, and under a Conservative government, hospitals in England have now missed their A&E target for 100 weeks in a row. I want to start today's debate, Mr. Speaker, by paying tribute to the hard-working staff at every level of our National Health Service. They work tirelessly in trying circumstances, and without them, there would be no NHS. Ministers in this place have adopted the practice of attempting to pretend that any criticism of government policy is a criticism of the health service or its staff. So let's clear one thing up right at the start of this debate. NHS staff are remarkable, and we are all in their debt. The achievements of NHS staff are despite government policy, not because of it. Of course I give way.
What has the opposition learnt from the mid-staff's disaster and tragedy, where they were hitting the targets, missing the point? What should they learn about how you drive quality forward in the health service?
Question.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for that question. And of course, if he paid attention to the Francis report, he would learn himself that targets were not themselves to blame for the mid-staff's tragedy, but that the way that they were applied in that hospital, and that's clearly stated in both the first and the second Francis inquiries, and indeed was a point made by the Prime Minister on the floor of this House when he reported to this House. So NHS staff are remarkable, and we are all in their debt, Madam Deputy Speaker. The achievements of NHS staff are despite government policy, not because of it. In the past 100 weeks, nearly 2.4 million patients have waited more than 4 hours in hospital accident and emergency units in England. Almost, of course.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way. I do appreciate that. I just wondered if you could give any explanation to the House as to why he feels that in my constituency the A&E targets have been met for 97% of patients. In his own hospital in England, it's been met by 93% of patients, but in Wales only 83%. Could you offer an explanation as to why that's the case, please?
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for that question. Had he been in this House longer and paid more attention to these issues, he would know that the data sets comparable between England and Wales aren't actually the same. He would also know that the people in Wales, the last time they had a Conservative government, were waiting 2 years for operations. And he'll know too that nobody campaigns more on behalf of my hospitals and the waiting times there than I do. So the issues are that 2.4 million patients have waited more than 4 hours in hospital accident emergencies in England. Almost 500,000 have spent more than 4 hours on a trolley waiting to be admitted. And more than 1,500 people have waited more than 12 hours to be admitted. Now, these figures offer a stark analysis of the difficulties facing accident and emergency. Even in this week of the summer solstice, this government's A&E winter crisis shows no signs of abating. In a debate in January this year, the Secretary of State for Health said that the NHS had just gone through a tough winter. And the evidence from NHS England now shows that accident and emergency departments have had 2 tough winters and are well on their way to a 3rd tough summer. Under this government, accident and emergency is experiencing a permanent winter. The reason for this... Of course, I give way.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving away. He will know that Northwick Park Hospital in my constituency has had some of the worst waiting times in the country over the past year. Does he understand, and will he address in his remarks, the fact that the ageing population over the age of 80 has increased in Brent by 50%, yet the funding available to cope with that increased population has been reduced by 25%. And that means that of the 250 people that attend A&E each day, 100 are dementia patients, which then become bed blockers because the integrated care package is not in place and is not working.
My honourable friend makes an excellent point. These are issues that I will come on to through the course of my remarks, and he's absolutely right to mention, and I pay tribute to him for doing that. But the reason for these pressures on A&E, in addition to the issues raised by my honourable friend, are because of the sharp increase in the numbers of people going to A&E that we've seen since 2010. And in the past, the Secretary of State has tried to claim that this increase is somehow the fault of the previous Labour government, but this is patently nonsense. Annual attendances, I'll just make some progress. Annual attendances at hospital accident and emergency units increased by 60,000 in the 4 years before 2010, whereas in the 4 years after 2010, they increased by nearly 600,000, 10 times faster. And the reality is that A&E dramatically improved between 2004 and 2010, when 98% of patients were seen within 4 hours. This is a crisis that only started on the Tories' watch, after they made it harder to see a GP, after they started stripping back social care services, and after they launched their damaging top-down reorganisation. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
To the honourable gentleman for giving way. Does he not think, though, that the closure of A&E at Crawley Hospital in 2005 under a Labour government distinctly wasn't helpful for A&E waiting times?
The honourable friend has made this point on the floor of the House on many occasions, and he's been a constant voice with regard to the hospital services used by his constituents. That was a decision made by clinicians in that area, and he will recognise that. He will recognise that. He will also recognise how much the framework has changed and how much more difficult the government's made it for communities like his to have their say on health configurations now. I'll give way.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend because he's absolutely right, because the difference is about it's not that there can be no change in our National Health Service. Where clinicians plan it and put it forwards in order to improve services, of course we'd be right to support it. The difference was that this government came in and attempted to close A&Es from the centre, like Lewisham A&E that they were going to close, and they said they wouldn't close. They said they wouldn't close Sidcup A&E, and they closed it within months of coming into government. That's the difference. That it was the government dictating closures, not local clinicians.
And my honourable friend is absolutely right, and the lesson that the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State drew from those episodes was that when they get beaten in the courts, change the law. A completely different approach from the last Labour government. The number of... I give way. Yeah.
Thank my honourable friend for giving way. In addition, as my honourable friend for Brent North mentioned, the distressing figures at Northwick Park Hospital, the solution that the government came up with was to close Central Middlesex A&E. Do you think that added to the crisis or made it better?
Well, everything that has transpired from the Honourable Lady's constituency, including from many medical professionals, has suggested that it made the situation much, much worse altogether. I'll give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. And isn't there an extra pressure from deficits, with many trusts ending the year with deficits? I know that Wythenshawe Hospital, looking at a £3 million deficit, has decided to try to cut 36 district nursing posts. Yet when the Health Select Committee looked at the winter pressures, the A&E pressures, the thing we really found is that you had to hang on to district nurses, community support, hospice nurses in every way. Isn't it just madness to push hospitals with deficits into cutting district nurse posts?
Honourable friend puts her finger on the problem absolutely precisely. It is absolute madness. This is happening at trusts all around the country, as hospital trusts in England, as the deficits there edge up towards £1 billion for this financial year. And the number of patients waiting more than 4 hours each year has rocketed by over 1 million. In just a moment, I will give way to the honourable gentleman, meaning there are now almost 4 times as many people waiting more than 4 hours than there were 5 years ago. That is a damning record, Madam Deputy Speaker, and based on the performance over the last Parliament, 5 more years of the same will see almost 2.5 million patients waiting over 4 hours each year by 2020. And for the benefit of patients, medical professionals and the healthcare system as a whole, this cannot be allowed to continue, and I give way.
He may be aware I spend my weekends working in the NHS attending seriously ill patients, and what I say to him is that what we're seeing are more patients who are elderly, who have a higher acuity, who need admission to hospital. Hospital is the only place for them. So can I take him back to what he said with regards to this being on the watch of this government? How does he account for the Royal College of Nurses who came to the Health Committee and said the decisions that needed to be taken should have been taken a decade or more before this party came to government to deal with this demographic shift?
If the honourable gentleman would like to compare records between this government and last government, we'll do that all day long. We'll do that all day long, and he'll come out on the wrong side of that debate. In terms of the ageing society, you'd think from listening to government ministers and from government backbenchers that this has just been sprung upon us. He's right. He's right. It has been coming for a long time. We had an awful lot more to address this than this government is doing, and I'll go on to explain why that is in just a moment. So, a real worry for the National Health Service in this context, in just a second I will, a real worry for the National Health Service in this context, and for those of us who use it and work within it every day, are the government's plans to suspend the work of NICE on its safe staffing programme, a move that is a rejection of a key recommendation made by the Francis report. And in response to this move, Sir Robert Francis said, and I quote, "I specifically recommended the work which NICE has been undertaking for a reason. I would not be surprised if this news generates a significant level of concern, and it seems a shame that the work of NICE has been stopped." Dr Clifford Mann, President of the Royal College of Emergency Medicine, has also said there are real pressures on nursing levels in emergency departments and that we are concerned about patient safety and staff welfare. So when he gets to his feet, I'd be grateful if the Minister could explain to me and to Sir Robert Francis why on earth has the government suspended this crucial work. I give way.
Giving way, I've read his motion very carefully indeed, and I'm left slightly bewildered since he seems to be suggesting that the solution to this problem is more resources for A&E and more resources for primary care. And yet I seem to remember just a few weeks ago standing at a general election which my party pledged £8 billion more for the NHS, and his party failed to back that. Can he explain where he would find the resources?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And this is the kind of magical thinking which afflicts Conservative thinking. Now, at the last general election, he'll be aware that we talked about a specific 2.5 fund to train 20,000 more nurses, 8,000 more GPs, so on and so forth. What we always said was that the NHS would get the money it deserves quite separately from that £2.5 billion from a Labour government, and that remains the case. He knows that that is the truth. So, Mr. Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is true that certain societal changes, including the ageing society, pose new challenges and offer new pressures for the NHS. But the service is under increasing financial pressure as a direct result of government policy. I give way.
Can I tell my honourable friend that we shouldn't recommend to anybody that they rely upon the promises of the party opposite, because they promised to keep Chase Farm Accident and Emergency Unit open. The Prime Minister himself promised that at the 2010 election. Then he closed it. And every A&E department in the surrounding area that now serves the people of Enfield, that's Royal Free, Barnet and Chase Farm and North Middlesex Hospital, all of them now continually miss their A&E waiting time targets.
I thank the Honourable Lady for that, and what a pleasure it is to see her again in this House of Commons. And she is absolutely entirely right, and we all remember the pictures, and we remember the Prime Minister's promises, and we remember the promises from the previous Secretary of State as well. And so she's absolutely right. Nobody should ever take any lessons from those opposite or believe what they're being told by them. Absolutely not one bit at all. Of course I will, yeah.
Grateful. Could the honourable gentleman explain why it is that when an A&E department is lost from a constituency on that side of the House, it's the government's fault? When an A&E department has been lost on this side of the House, under the previous government, it's clinically led. Could he explain that contradiction?
Because I'm afraid the honourable gentleman isn't listening. The rules have changed. The system whereby these processes are undertaken have comprehensively changed. If he was to draw a golden thread through Conservative health policy over the past 5 years, it will be that the public doesn't matter, it's not listened to, and that change is driven from the centre, irrespective of what local clinicians say. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I thank the honourable member for giving way, and this is all a little bit ironic, given that in my Corby constituency, the party opposite went around petrifying local people that the A&E at Kettering General Hospital was going to close. It's still open, and it's performing better. Would he like to apologise? Yeah.
If the honourable gentleman's seeking an apology, would he like to apologise for the fact that A&Es in England have missed their waiting time targets for the last 100 weeks? Would he like to apologise for that? I don't see any trace of an apology or any scintilla of embarrassment on his face. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is true that certain societal changes, including the Age in Society, I shall make some progress, but I will come back to the honourable gentleman. It is true that certain societal changes, including the Age in Society, pose new challenges and offer new pressures for the National Health Service, but the service is also under increasing financial pressure as a direct result of government policy. First, declining access to social care. I'll make some progress and I will come back. First, declining access to social care and the squeeze on primary care has forced people to turn to A&E in increasing numbers, and also seen increasing numbers of admissions that could have been avoided if people had received better care outside of hospital. Secondly, the government wasted £3 billion at least on a damaging top-down reorganisation that nobody wanted and nobody voted for, and which was hidden from the electorate, and this reorganisation sucked resources from frontline patient care. Now, we know that senior members of the Cabinet believe that the reorganisation was a catastrophic mistake. We know, in the words of the BMA Chair Mark Porter, that, quote, the damage done to the NHS has been profound and intense, and we know that it hasn't made the NHS more productive or more efficient. Third, the effect of this wastage has been compounded by the short-sighted cuts to nurse training places at the beginning of the last Parliament. This means that there aren't enough staff working in hospitals, a key criticism of the Keogh review. But in addition to compromising patient safety and clinical outcomes, this government decision has left trusts over-reliant on expensive agency staff. I'll give way to the Honourable Lady.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. When I worked in hospitals and was responsible for arranging community-based discharge, two of the problems, the major problems that created a delay in discharge, and I hate the expression bed blocking, it's such an insult to elderly people. There were two things. One was access to community care facilities in terms of home care support, but the other was community equipment, actual hospital beds, hoists or bathing equipment. If you don't have all of the pieces in place, and these often come from local authority funding, not NHS funding, it will not happen, and that's exacerbating the problem in A&E.
It makes a very prescient point. The government talks the talk, but it does not walk the walk, and she's just detailed precisely why that is the case. Of course, I give way.
To the honourable gentleman, particularly as he's just responded to the intervention by his honourable friend who is from Wales. Would he accept that in every financial year since 2010, the NHS in England has had a real terms increase in funding, albeit a modest one, but there has been a cut of 8% by the Labour government in Wales, and the A&E target in Wales has not been met since 2008.
Speaker, can I congratulate the honourable gentleman on his knighthood? It's remiss of me not to have done that. He will know that real terms increases and cash increases are not the same. He'll also know, because he voted for it, that the budget in Wales has been cut by this government by over £2 billion. So if we're going to compare like with like, let's compare like with like. Now, the Royal College of Nursing has calculated that £980 million was spent on agency staff in the last year alone, almost £1 billion. And these and other choices made by this government have meant that collectively, trusts in England reported a total deficit of £823 million in 2014-15. This is simply unsustainable. A recent survey by the King's Fund found that 90% of trust financial directors and 85% of commissioners are concerned about the financial state of their local health economies, a view that will be shared by many members on both sides of this House. An investigation by Pulse revealed that CCGs were being forced to use their 2015-16 winter pressures allocations just to maintain regular services. And questions must be asked about revelations this week that thousands of foreign nurses working in our National Health Service could be forced to leave the country as a result of the government's immigration rules. The RCN points out that this would cause chaos for the NHS and waste tens of millions of pounds. Secretary of State laughs as I mention this. It would make matters much worse for patients and frontline clinicians too. So can the Minister tell us when he replies, how many nurses will be lost from A&E? How many nurses will be lost in total as a result of this move? Where in the country will they be lost? How will these vacancies be filled? What will this cost? Has he or any minister in his department made representations to the Prime Minister about the effects of this policy? And if so, will he share these with the House? And when did health ministers know that this policy might cause so much damage?
I'm very grateful. It'd be also interesting when the Minister comes to his feet for him to answer how exactly that cut and that restriction on nurses will impact on the Royal Stoke Hospital, which had the great misfortune for patients and public more generally of topping the list for the longest waits last winter of over 12 hours on trolleys.
That's absolutely right, and Stoke deserves better. Nobody's worked harder than him to ensure that it does. And let's make sure that the Minister answers those points when he gets to his feet. Because this understaffing crisis represents a dire situation that will only get worse unless the government demonstrates an understanding of these issues and gives them the attention that they deserve. As well as deficits this year, we know too that the 5-year forward view is based upon assumptions that the NHS can save £22 billion by 2020. So will the Minister give us an assurance today that this will not result in any fewer medical staff or cuts to hospital or community services? Will he also commit to placing the analysis and the assumptions behind these efficiency plans in the public domain so that we can have an informed debate about NHS funding? We must have an honest debate, not a programme of services being set up to fail and then being cut by stealth. Give way to the Honourable Lady.
I worked as a nurse under the last Labour government, and what the Labour government did then, they may have kept numbers the same, but they reduced the skill mix, which greatly affected the safety of patients on both wards and outpatients. Can you explain that?
It's a matter of fact that we increased nursing numbers. When we came to office in 1997, we were training 15,000 nurses a year. When we left office in 2010, we were training 20,000 nurses a year, and the Honourable Lady will be only too well aware of that. And so on social care, under this government, 300,000 fewer older people are getting the care they need, meaning more and more people are forced to stay in hospital. But that is only part of the story. When someone who needs care cannot get the help they need, it increases the risk that they will struggle or fall ill and have to come to accident and emergency. This is clearly demonstrated in the increasing number of older people arriving at A&E by ambulance. Almost 100,000 extra patients over the age of 90 were brought to accident and emergency by ambulance last year. This is an indictment of government policy towards older people, but it is further exacerbated when the true scale of the damage to social care is revealed. Prior to the election, the National Audit Office published its report into the impact of government cuts to local council budgets. The report found that 40% of the total savings between 2013-14 and 2014-15 were made through reducing adult social care services. The Association of Directors of Adult Social Services has calculated that a further £1.1 billion will be cut from adult social care over this financial year, and the President of the Association has said that short-changing social care is short-sighted and short-term. The number of patients ending up in A&E because they can't get the care they need to help them stay healthy outside hospital is the clear evidence of this short-termism. Cutting the social care budget is clearly a false economy, Madam Deputy Speaker, as thousands turn to A&E as a result. And not only is this bad for the patient, it's bad for the taxpayer. If a patient is not getting the care they need, their condition will deteriorate, meaning more complex interventions will be needed. A recent poll commissioned by the Care and Support Alliance found that 9 out of 10 GPs believe that deep social care cuts are responsible for the overcrowding in our accident and emergency departments. And the government needs to get a grip and address the crisis in social care in order to relieve the pressure on A&E departments and GP surgeries. But instead, the government has chosen to risk more pressure in the health system at all levels by announcing further cuts of £200 million to the public health budgets of local authorities, without any idea of whether they could be made without harming vital services that potentially save money.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Would the Shadow Minister recognise the initiative that's happening in Northamptonshire, where Kettering General Hospital, we're not only going to have an A&E, we're going to have an urgent care, but we're also going to have social care, mental health facilities and GP all on the same site, so that they can go and be dealt with there and then correctly, and also actually have an urgent care centre in my constituency. Isn't that the way forward?
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for that intervention, and I absolutely agree with him that models like that and local best practice can exist in pockets all over the country. It's just a shame that so many health economies are getting cut to the bone that stops them from developing those kinds of care models that he talks about, because he's right. He's right. It's precisely that kind of integration that does, I think, point the way towards the future. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to ask the Minister, when he gets to his feet, have the effects of these cuts to the public health budget, have the effects of this upon primary care and accident emergency been modelled? Have they been modelled by the Department? And will he share that work with the House? And if this work has not been done, will he explain to us why that has not been done? And will he tell us if the Department was consulted about these latest cuts and what its response was? I now want to turn to the situation in general practice. Over the last Parliament, we saw a marked increase in the number of people waiting longer for a GP appointment. By 2013-14, almost 6 million people couldn't get a GP appointment. And if the trend continues, it could be around 10 million who can't get in to see their GP by the end of this Parliament. These people are often left with little option but to turn to accident emergency. And the GP patient survey suggests that almost 1 million patients went to A&E last year because they couldn't get a convenient GP appointment. So it's clear that the GP workforce crisis is a major driver of the issues that we're discussing today.
Very grateful, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Very grateful to my honourable friend. He's making an extremely good speech and he's been very generous with his time on interventions. But on that point, in Stoke-on-Trent again, where we've traditionally always had far more patients per GP than the national average, where the age of the population of those GPs is rapidly approaching and indeed often gone way past retirement age, what we're seeing is that not that people can't get an appointment when it's convenient, they just simply can't get one for days and days and days on end.
Our friend absolutely makes the case. Again, what's happening in Stoke there, it appears to be acting as something I regret to say is a canary in a coal mine for the NHS around the country, and what we're seeing with those issues in Stoke are going to be increasingly seen in areas all over the country. So it's clear, as I was saying, the GP workforce crisis is a major driver of these problems, and the number of full-time equivalent GPs per head has fallen over the last 5 years, even as demand increases. I've been very generous with time. I do have to press on if that pleases the honourable gentleman. In 2013, the government announced its call to action to improve general practice access and experience for patients. In this call to action, the government set out 6 key indicators to rate the quality of access and experience for patients. So 1 year later, every single indicator has shown a deterioration in performance. Fewer people described the overall experience of their surgery as good, and fewer people were able to get an appointment. And the government has to address this, because only by addressing the crisis in general practice, in addition to social care, can the government begin to relieve the pressures upon accident and emergency departments. And so when the Secretary of State and the Prime Minister discuss the NHS in this House, they like to use words such as openness and transparency, but sadly their actions betray this sentiment on a routine basis. And I refer again to Professor Keogh's seminal letter from 2 years ago to the Secretary of State, in which he refers to the use and principle of transparency in the NHS as representing, I quote, a turning point for our health service from which there is no return. Except for this government, it seems that there is a return. Currently, NHS England publishes the performance measures for each A&E in England every week. These figures contain a wealth of information for each trust, and it makes this data available to the public. The data shows how each A&E department is performing across a range of measures, and this timely data can be used to target specific interventions at trusts that are struggling. This reporting time period also means that issues can be identified quickly and resolved promptly. Now, rather than taking action to ensure that hospitals in England meet this target, the government is seeking to hide the performance data. We won't be able to see how A&Es are performing each week. We'll now have to wait until the end of each month. And worse, by publishing a significant number of performance measures from across the whole of the NHS on the same day, it appears that the government has found an innovative new way of burying bad news. That is, publishing even worse news at the same time. Patients deserve better than this. Clearly, ministers find it more palatable to be reminded of their failings just once a month rather than at the end of each week. This move is designed to make the red box lighter and the scathing headlines kinder. And won't many people conclude that the monthly publication of A&E data, unlike other monthly data sets, has nothing to do with patient care and everything to do with political and media management? The issues facing accident and emergency departments, I must make some progress, the issues facing accident and emergency departments, GP surgeries and social care services will not be solved by amending the date on which performance indicators are published. The public will be rightly sceptical about the motivations for the reduced publication of data that illustrates both good and bad performance. This is a move designed to take pressure off ministers as they turn a blind eye to the pressures they're inflicting upon the health service. This government has introduced pressures into the health service that have built up until the system can no longer cope. A&E is full to bursting. Social care has been cut to the bone, meaning that patients can't be discharged, that wards are getting fuller, that there are delays for admission, and that more people are waiting longer for treatment. This is indisputable. In England, the target of seeing 95% of patients within 4 hours has been missed for 100 weeks in a row. And instead of easing the pressures in A&E, this government has decided to make it harder for patients to see the effects of government policy upon the services that they use by restricting the performance data that's available. Under this government, it's getting harder to see a GP, it's getting harder to be seen at A&E, and now it's getting harder to see how the NHS is performing. Not only is this record of this government shameful, the cynicism and complacency of this government is shameful too. Professional bodies and members of the opposition have long warned the government that the path it has placed the NHS on is damaging the service, working against patients' best interests and causing unprecedented professional concern. Having done this, the government is now seeking to evade scrutiny. Today, ministers must explain why they are seeking to make the NHS performance less transparent, why they are seeking to hide the damage caused by its policies from patients and the public, and how it intends to protect services and tackle hospital deficits this year.
The question is, as on the order paper, before I call the next the Minister, I'm going to put a 6-minute time limit on backbenches. That doesn't apply to front benches. 6 minutes is already a little bit overly generous. So if I could just make a plea to have as few interventions as possible, it means that we can get as many backbench interventions as we can. So with that in mind, Ben Gummer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I take this opportunity to congratulate you on your election. It is a great pleasure for my first occasion speaking under your chairmanship. And you will have noted on the order paper that the subject for debate is A&E services, an important matter that everyone in this House cares much about. And you will also have noted, Madam Deputy Speaker, that there are a number of proposers of the motion. There's the Leader of the Opposition, the Shadow Secretary of State, the Minister for Care, and some others. And my first question would be, why on this important matter, one which the opposition says it seems to think is critical in its own programme for the NHS, that the Secretary of State for Health, the Shadow Secretary of State for Health, cannot be here to make the argument himself, and we understand that the Minister for Care will not be wrapping up the debate.
Grateful to the Minister for giving way. I can tell you where they aren't. They aren't hiding behind trees, and they aren't meeting Rupert Murdoch in an underground car park. That's where they aren't.
I'm not sure I got the gist of the honourable member's point, but what I do think is that if you're the Shadow Secretary of State for Health, you should propose the motion if you're putting an opposition day on health matters. And I just want to hazard a guess that there has been a disagreement between these two shadow ministers. Perhaps a suggestion that one of them might be using health debates as an opportunity to grandstand. And I hope that's not the case. But what I am slightly concerned about is that we're about to see another episode of the ongoing psychodrama, which is the Labour Party. You know, we had the TBGBs, and then when that very happily came to an end, we had the Miliband band of brothers, a disaster for that family, happily not for the country.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I really wonder whether this is within scope and whether it is at all orderly to be debating which minister is answering, is proposing a debate. We have many occasions in this House, including the Chancellor didn't come last week.
Yeah.
This happens quite a bit. It's just not orderly to be starting off the debate in this way.
I thank the honourable member for that point of order, and I think that the point has been made, and perhaps we can move on with the debate. Ben Gummer.
It is a matter of importance, Madam Deputy Speaker, because in this kind of episode of health handbags that we now have been given, we are given an insight into the crisis within the Labour Party and their inability to understand actually what the priorities are for the NHS and for the country. You see, if the NHS is of such importance to the Labour Party, if it is of such importance, if the A&E is of such importance, you would expect the Shadow Secretary of State to introduce...
Order. If the Minister could just sit down for a moment. I will take this point of order. I imagine it's very similar to the previous point of order. It would be nice if we could move the debate on. There are several maiden speeches that are waiting to be taken. I will take the member's point of order in a second. There are several maiden speeches to be taken. It's an important subject. I would like to move on rather than get bogged down in this. I will take the honourable member's point of order and then I hope we can move on.
I'm very grateful, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think for the benefit of new members on both sides of the House, it would be really helpful, I think, if the Chair could just spend a moment just clarifying when it is in order to challenge the Chair's ruling on something and when it isn't.
He just carried on.
Indeed. Thank you very much. It is the person in the Chair's decision as to whether or not something is within scope or not. I did not take the Minister's response to my decision as a challenge to the Chair. I merely just wanted to point out that actually it would be nice to get on with the debate and to allow honourable members, especially newer members, to make their maiden speeches. So if the Minister could move on, we'd all be very grateful.
Yeah. With pleasure, Madam Deputy Speaker, because in the absence of the Shadow Secretary of State, I shall channel him, which is something I enjoy doing. I like him, and he's a man who often, sometimes, a few times, speaks some sense. Just before the last election, he said this. After the election, we need to come together and then allow the NHS to get on with the job of building 21st century services. And what I don't understand in this motion that he has put before the House with other members of the opposition is that far from coming together, far from trying to build a consensus on the future of the NHS, what they are seeking to do, once again, is to reproduce the golden oldies of criticisms which they put before the country before the last election and were so roundly rejected. But that is after the election. And what I don't understand is that what the Shadow Secretary of State felt was the purpose of leading a campaign so politicising the NHS before the election. Because I, like so many other people, had a leaflet through my door saying that there would be 24 hours to save the NHS.
We are straying into the general election, which has gone, and away from what is on the order paper, which is a debate on A&E services. If the Minister could stay on that subject, I'd be enormously grateful.
With pleasure, Madam Deputy Speaker. The point is we've been warned that there are 24 hours to save the NHS, and it is still here, and the A&E crisis, which is named at the top of the...
Order! If the Minister could just resume his seat. We are beginning to stray into the realms of challenging the Chair's decision. If he could just stick to the debate on the order paper. We don't have very much time. I don't want to take any more interventions on this one subject. If we could just move on, I'd be very grateful to him.
I apologise, Madam Deputy Speaker. The motion speaks about A&E services, and I'd just like to speak about the progress that the NHS has made in the last 5 years. Because far from the picture which has been painted by the Shadow Minister, far from the interventions that have been made on his speech, actually the NHS is treating more people than ever before. It is treating more people in A&E than ever before. It is treating more people at a higher rate of satisfaction than ever before. And the result of that is that patient outcomes, something that we didn't hear much about in the Shadow Minister's speech, have improved, and we are treating more people to a higher standard.
Will you give way on that?
I will give way.
Very grateful to the Minister. Is it the case that the excellent policy of 7-day-a-week GP services means an expansion in the amount of GP service, and so this will provide welcome relief from the pressures on A&E, which will add to the good work that's being done in the hospital?
Yeah, good point.
And that is precisely the kind of policy that we would seek to find consensus on in the months and years ahead. There is a choice for opposition members, and I know that there are many new members who wish to give their maiden speeches in this debate. And I will just say to them, the choice is this. Do we come together to try and model better care within the NHS, better outcomes for patients, or do we seek to divide? So to answer the specific points in the motion, On the matter of performance, the Shadow Minister I will give way, actually.
To the Minister for giving way. And I wanted to raise a point of substance which affects people in my constituency. There are young people in my constituency who would love to train as nurses and work in the NHS, but by cutting the number of training places in London by 25%, the government has made it much harder for this to happen. At the same time, when I last spoke to the recently retired Chief Executive of King's College Hospital Foundation Trust, he told me that he was recruiting nurses in the Philippines because there are not enough nurses in...
Order! Sit, please. When the chair is on her feet, members sit. I have said before, interventions need to be very, very short and kept to a minimum. That was too long. Minister.
The Shadow Secretary of State cut the number of training places for nurses. They have been increased under the previous government, and they're now at record levels. We were on the matter of performance, which lies at the heart of this motion. And I just want to suggest, I will come back to it at a later point, I would just like to say this to the Shadow Minister and to members of the opposition. When he speaks about performance of the NHS, although he can give good and warm words about workforce, what he fails to do is congratulate them on the exceptional performance they are putting in under unprecedented pressures. At no point in his speech did he acknowledge the real increase in pressures at A&E services in the NHS, and he is unable to explain why, with 3,000 patients additionally a day, 3,000 patients treated, seen and then discharged within the 95% A&E target, that is being delivered by NHS staff across the service. And he also fails to point out those places we have seen remarkable successes. He fails to point out the instance, for instance, of Barking, Havering and Redbridge Trust, which has seen an improvement in A&E performance times of 16% just in the last year. Frontline staff delivering better outcomes as a result of the changes made by this Secretary of State over the last 5 years.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. However, he gives an absolutely fictional account of the remarks I've just given to this House. And if he's so confident in his description of what's happening in the health service, can he explain why, in this comedy document produced by the Conservative Research Department, it says that new polling by Conservative peer Lord Ashcroft found that 47% of voters believe Labour is the best approach to the health service, while just 29% picked the Conservatives?
Hear, hear.
As Madam Deputy Speaker pointed out, we have just had an election and the voters' voice on the NHS was loud and clear. But there is a simple issue about the performance of this nation's NHS, and that is this. An independent think tank, one of the most respected in the field, has rated it as the best performing NHS in the world. It is better than that in Scotland, better than that in Northern Ireland, better than that in Wales, in Labour-run Wales, and A&E, which is measured across the world by different countries, performs no better than in any other country than in this country. So if we wish to go to international comparisons, I think that the Shadow Minister would do well to accept the extraordinary work that NHS staff are already delivering to make this the best health service in the world.
I'm grateful again to the Minister for giving way, and I wish he was right. I genuinely wish this was the best A&E unit in the world, but I have to draw his attention to a press article from January this year from the IB Times, when a journalist contracted the Department of Health for the basis of the Secretary of State's claim. They were told there was no concrete research upon which Hunt had made the statement. This is a complete fabrication. Will he set the record straight?
The Shadow Minister should know that for every country that measures A&E, and that is the only way that we can judge this, we perform best in this country against all other comparisons. And the trouble is by talking down that remarkable fact, all that we do is to denigrate the work of the people who deliver that every day. I would like to move on to the financial performance of the NHS, which the Shadow Minister raised second in his speech and lies at the heart of his motion. And let me just set the financial context of this, because whilst opposition members are giggling, they might like to remember that at the last election they went in not willing to commit to the NHS's own plan for the next 5 years. There is only one major party that pledged to give the NHS what it requested in terms of funding for the next 5 years, and that is this party on this side of the House. And the history on this of delivery is clear. An additional £12.9 billion of cash in the last 5 years, a contribution of £2 billion in this financial year, and a further £8 billion to fulfil the 5-year plan. That is the financial background to this debate, and it is a background that the opposition could not match. They refused to match at the last election. But talking about money on its own does not get to the root of the problem, which I'm afraid is not recognised in the motion, which is the relationship between quality, standards and money. Because at no point does... I will give way.
Would the Minister agree with me that it would probably do the Shadow Minister a great deal of good, together with the opposition front benches there, if they moved down to Wales, where there's been an 8% cut in the budget, and also they have not met A&E targets since 2008?
Well, it's a real delight to respond to my honourable friend, the member for Gower. It's probably a good thing for the Shadow Minister and those people living in England that they don't have to endure the experiences of people in Wales, which I'm afraid have been inflicted on them by the appalling management of the Labour government there, who have made the choice not to invest in the NHS in the way that we have here in a time of constrained budgets across the public sector. But I just have to say to the Shadow Minister that by concentrating specifically on money, something he cannot match anyway, the commitments of this side of the House, he misses the whole point around quality and around safety, which is conjoined with money. Because if we go back to mid-staffs, you can see they're a hospital. They may groan, but they may wish to reflect on why it went wrong. Here was a hospital that was within budget, was hitting its targets, and yet at the same time was killing people. And until that simple fact is remembered, until we put quality and patient care first, we will not get efficiency either in care or in money that on both sides of the House I'm sure that we wish to see. But also I'm sure the Shadow Minister has come to the House without reading the speech given by my right honourable friend, when he has addressed directly the issues in some trusts, caused in large part by agency spending that in turn has had to happen because we have put right the chronic understaffing created by the previous Labour government, a chronic understaffing that led in part to the catastrophe at mid-staffs. He has not read the comments of my right honourable friend about limiting the salaries of highly paid managers in the NHS, and he's not read the comments of my right honourable friend about cutting consultancy pay, because it is precisely that kind of action, enabling chief executives of NHS trusts to be able to control their budgets, that this government is taking to ensure that both at a national level and at a local level we are living within our means. I will give way to the honourable gentleman.
Because he says it in relation to mid-staffs that the government has responded. Would he then give us a guarantee that there will be no removal of the minimum staffing requirement that came in on the back of the mid-staffs report?
To that to the honourable gentleman. And on minimum staffing, it was in response to the Francis inquiry that this government, in its previous incarnation, actually set the CQC a specific target of doing something about minimum staffing. It wasn't there beforehand. And you see, he understands that relationship between safe care and money. I just wish he were able to explain it to his front bench. Because if they were to go to hospitals like the Salford Royal, they would see how through instigating safer care, that hospital is saving £5 billion a year. It is through combining quality and efficiency that you actually get the double benefit of better care for patients and better care and better returns for the taxpayer. I will.
I thank the Minister for giving way. Under the last coalition government, we saw a new urgent care centre opened in Corby, which has provided an excellent service for my constituents. Would he agree with me that that is not only in addition to the service that we're seeing at Kettering, but it's so important that care is not only accessible but also as local as possible?
Well, my honourable friend and his honourable friends and mine in Northamptonshire have worked hard together and previously on a cross-party basis to find the best configuration of services in their county. It's just a great shame that that model of cross-party working can't be echoed or reflected across the House. And it would be in that vein that I would prefer it if they were to come here and talk about plans for social care. You see, we have two competing visions of social care from the opposition benches. We have sometimes some thoughtful remarks from the Minister, the Shadow Minister for Care, and then we have the repetition of a phrase by the Shadow Secretary of State about wanting a top-down reorganisation of the NHS around a social care model, none of which will deliver what we all want to see, which is an integrated NHS and social care model, one that we are beginning the journey of creating here. And the way that we're doing it is by reflecting locally what local places need in terms of integration, rather than creating a national model to which they have to adhere. But again, it's important to fix this all. I will just after this comment. It is important to put all of this in the financial context, because I have been through the lobbies with the Shadow Minister and with many of the members opposite who were in the previous Parliament. We went through the lobbies just before the election, where we agreed to cuts in public expenditure in the first 2 years of this Parliament, and the former Shadow Chancellor committed the Labour Party to cuts in local government spending. We know that there are difficult choices forced on us by the catastrophe and chaos that we were left in 2010. Those difficult choices are ones that members opposite need to confront, and they cannot have it both ways. They cannot, on the one hand, say that we need massive increases in payments for social care, and on the other say that they are going to constrain public spending. So the answer to that dilemma is surely to try and find a better way of integrating social care, one that I would hope would see cross-party consensus rather than the politicking we have just seen at Dispatch Box. I give way.
I'm very grateful to the Minister for giving way. He's talking about the financial context. What worries me is that in the London NHS, a lot of NHS managers talk about a Lewisham-sized hole in the NHS budget in South East London. Of course, we stopped the Secretary of State last time from closing Lewisham's for A&E. Can the Minister today make me a promise that he won't be coming back to Lewisham for another go?
My right honourable friend never planned to close Lewisham Hospital, and I will give her this promise that I will certainly come and speak to her before anything happens, in fact, if nothing happens, about her constituency, because I care very much about the provision of secondary and tertiary care in her constituency, and I know that that goes also for my colleagues on the front bench. But here are the facts of what we are doing in terms of funding better social care and integrated social care in the NHS. We are already transferring £1.1 billion worth of money of NHS spending to social care funding. There will be, as part of the additional £8 billion over the next 5 years, that will be for social care as well as the NHS. It is part of an integrated system that NHS England envisages. And through the Better Care Fund, funded to the tune of £5.3 billion, we are funding this local integration of social care and healthcare, something that will produce a different solution in Manchester from in Ipswich, and that is a good thing because those two places are different. I will.
I thank the Minister for giving way eventually, because he's made a number of points about my local area. In Salford, we are moving ahead with integration. We are one of the better places in the country. But I have to say to him, the work there is not assisted by a number of things. The Better Care funding is not extra funding. A very large hole has been created, as in Lewisham, there's a hole being created through cutting back on social care funding. And even at the smaller level, walk-in centres being closed in Salford and the ending of active case management as efficiency cuts made have not helped. All of these things are part of the jigsaw. All we've seen is cuts.
I'll say to the Honourable Lady that the walk-in closures are supported by her hospital because it gave a safer service. But I would also say that I walked through that lobby with her also. And because her party is unable to make a decision about money being spent on benefits and on the general budget for government, she would not be able to pledge any more. In fact, she could only promise less funding for social funding than the party on this side. She has to be straight with voters. You cannot have it both ways. You cannot, on the one hand, spend money on the NHS, but also on benefits and all the other things that the party opposite are pledged to increase funding on, and also claim to be the party of fiscal responsibility. It just does not hang true. I will give way to my honourable friend.
On my friend for giving way. Can I welcome the focus on integration, particularly in relation to social care? But what Enfield suffers from is a historical underfunding, a lack of fairness to the growing deprivation and age profile. We have made great progress, but then need to make further progress to ensure that there are winners like Enfield, which may lead other parts of London and in London to be losers. But let's take those decisions now and make it fairer in terms of funding, particularly in relation to social care.
Well, my honourable friend is right, and again he's highlighting a local solution to a serious problem, and one that will not reflect what is needed in other parts of the country. And that is why it's so important that we concentrate the additional money that we are providing to local solutions rather than a top-down reorganisation. I just want to touch briefly on the other issues raised by the Shadow Minister. In his speech, he spoke about primary care. Again, he doesn't seem to have listened to my right honourable friend's latest announcements on New Deal for GPs. Increasing the workforce, supporting new buildings for GPs, improving access through local innovation, and trying to do something to reduce the pressures that we do understand are on GPs, and one that go back many years, not helped, I have to say, by the GP contract signed by his predecessors in his party. The fact is, you have a choice in government about whether you declare an ambition, and there was an ambition declared on primary care by the party opposite the last election, one that the Royal College of GPs declared was ill thought out and a knee-jerk response, or you can actually try and do something about it, listen to concerns, and actually remodel care so that it helps patients. And that is what we have done on this side of the House. My right honourable friend has spoken about it, and the work is being carried on by my right honourable friend, the member the Minister for Primary Care. I'm not actually going to take any more interventions of my honourable friend Mines, because I just want to cover the additional issues raised by the Shadow Minister. But before I do so, I would like to know whether he agrees with the target that we have for 5,000 additional GPs, something that can only be afforded because of the £8 billion that we have committed to the NHS. One commitment that, again, he has been unable to sign up to. And I'd like to touch finally on the meat of this. I will give way.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. He's touched upon the issues of finance repeatedly during the course of his contributions. He's not given accurate reflection of what this party's position was going into the general election with regard to funding for the NHS. And I'll ask him again before he finishes. Will he point out today how this £22 billion of efficiencies is going to be made, and will he give a guarantee that it will not affect either hospital services, A&E services, staff numbers, or any frontline services in any community in this country?
I do find it difficult to have to repeat this to the honourable gentleman, as I have to the Shadow Secretary of State on a previous occasion. This plan is a plan by NHS England. It is one that we have supported both before the election and after. It is one that the opposition failed to support. The details of the plan have been worked out by NHS England and will be revealed in due course. But it is their plan, and our part of the deal is that we provide the money that they have requested, which is £8 billion. And you will see the plan, Madam Deputy Speaker, as it is revealed by NHS England. And it is an ambitious one, but it is one that we will fund from our side of the bargain. But the Shadow Minister reveals, I'm afraid, in his comments, and also in the motion to which his name is put, that his motives are not pure. Because he speaks about the reporting targets for the A&E departments around the country. But he doesn't mention that the recommendation to change the reporting standard was made not by the government, but was on the basis of a recommendation made by Professor Sir Bruce Keir. And he did so as part of a general review of reporting standards. And he doesn't mention, the Shadow Minister, when he talks about the reporting standards, that we are bringing cancer waiting times from being quarterly to monthly, something I would have hoped he would have welcomed. He doesn't mention that we, for the first time, are introducing mental health waiting times, as well as putting into the NHS Constitution a parity of esteem, something that was not there under the original Constitution written and instituted by the Shadow Secretary of State. Two matters of vital concern to our constituents that we are correcting on the recommendation of Professor Sir Bruce Keogh. And he does not mention that Sir Bruce recommends that the A&E targets are brought to monthly reporting precisely so that they can have clinical parity with all other standards and produce a better quality of statistical reporting. Now, he will find himself, I'm afraid, in this debate on the wrong side, not just of the clinical evidence given by Sir Bruce, nor just on the wrong side of the Patients' Association that welcomed the change, but on the wrong side also of the Royal College of Emergency Medicine, who said this of the change: the move from weekly to monthly reporting better reflects meaningful trends and will in fact increase the validity of this key metric by reducing the effect of short-term and unforeseeable events. And the Nuffield Trust said that the replacement of weekly A&E figures with a monthly publication of indicators for many targets should help us understand changes in performance in a more meaningful way. On the wrong side of clinicians, on the wrong side of academics, on the wrong side of the Patients' Association, on the wrong side of the Royal College of Emergency Medicine, on the wrong side of the argument. And the reason why he is on the wrong side of the argument is because he has made a choice. And I appeal to the new members on the opposition benches who are sitting behind him. We can go through the next 5 years, motion by motion, vote by vote, opposing everything that is done on the basis of clinical evidence just for the purpose of making political gain. And if they do that, I in turn will remind the opposition of the scandal of mixed-sex wards, the scandal of the highest hospital infection rate in the developed world, the scandal of a doubled pay bill for managers, the scandal of Morecambe Bay, and the scandal of mid-staffs, the scandal of some of the worst cancer outcomes in the world. I will remind them of that every time they seek to oppose us for political reasons. The choice is theirs. Or they can take the other tack, which is to try and listen to clinicians, to be constructive and to de-weaponise the NHS. I will seek to do what the Shadow Secretary of State claimed to want to do, to come together and allow the NHS to get on with the job of building 21st century services. Because if the opposition make the wrong choice in this, all they will do is confirm in the minds of the British people that they put politics before the NHS, that for the Labour Party it is the party first always. For us on this side of the House, it is the NHS, it is patients who always come first.
Philippa Whitford.
Deputy Speaker. Obviously quite a lively debate from both sides. I would have to say, as someone who is not very long from being on the front line as a surgeon within the NHS, I find it a bit sad to listen to the debate and how angry it is. The 4-hour target should be a tool and should not be an end in itself. It is something that is to take the temperature to understand what's happening underneath. We wouldn't shove a patient in a bath of iced water if they had a temperature. We'd look for the infection, we'd try and understand it, and we would try to treat it. And unfortunately, the 4-hour target has simply become a stick, and today it seemed to be a stick that was just being thrown backwards and forwards. People working in A&E do face great difficulty, and that's why we're not recruiting trainees to A&E and why we are actually losing senior doctors at an incredible rate from A&E. Instead of it being one of the most rewarding places to work, people see it as the most miserable.
Thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. Although the target is used to measure or take the temperature, do you not feel that the fact that it's gone up 401% since 2009-10 is something to be concerned and worried about?
The target has gone up 400?
The time that people have had to wait more hours has gone up.
So, excuse me, and also, yeah, no, it's fine. But again, can I just say, interventions to a minimum, and the Honourable Lady is not on a time limit, but if she can be aware that there are many members coming in to speak. Thank you.
We have seen the performance, and we've seen the performance drop across the UK. The right honourable gentleman opposite quoted a report showing that England was performing better than Scotland. I would be interested in seeing that one, where it is comparing like for like with core A&E services, because that's not the figures that I see. But we all face the same challenge. We are dealing with older patients. They are more complex. The figures from Scotland last winter actually showed we didn't have a huge increase in numbers, but far more of those patients had to be admitted. It was not a matter of anything else that could be done. And that is something that we are going to face more and more in the future. The problem is that we are losing the staff to actually deal with that. And we're talking about A&E. But if we looked at A&E, in the vast majority of cases, that is not where the key issue lies. There are two simple things. The number of patients coming in, and that relates to out-of-hours GP access, and patients getting back out, which is described by the Royal College of Emergency Medicine as exit block. It's important to remember that the 4 hours is not someone sitting on a chair waiting for 4 hours, which is often the impression that is given to people, that you turn up in A&E and you'll sit there, no one will touch you for 4 hours. You will be triaged, you will see a clinician, you will have a history taken, you will have investigations, you may well get sewn up or given something, and you'll go home. Those patients are moving through. Our problem is the patients who have to come in. And it results in a whole cascade of issues, which is people stuck on trolleys, getting the start of a bed sore. It is families miserable. It is staff very depressed at trying to look after people in a corridor. It also results in people ending up boarded to any ward, any port in a storm, which means people are not in the correct ward, not getting the correct treatment from the correct team. We know that, bizarrely, then results in longer patient stays, which exacerbates it. So what we need to do, as we've done in Scotland, we set up the Unscheduled Care Action Plan, is work with all stakeholders. And that's looking at how patients flow through, not people obsessed with measuring the target and counting it, but people who are opening the gates in front of the patient. The data on how long patients wait should automatically be available to you from your system. It shouldn't require an extra body to generate it. And I would say that if we have that data weekly, which means we're getting it timeously, we can actually see 1 week from the other, we ought to be able to see the patterns. The problem with monthly data for something that you identify as a currently acute issue is by the time that's collated and verified and out, staff may not quite remember what it was that made that a bad week. Whereas with weekly data, you can see whether you are getting a response to your actions. So I do support that we should keep weekly measurements. I do not support that they should be used as a tool, not just for beating across the benches here, but I can tell you staff in the NHS feel that they are beat over the head with these targets. So it's not a matter of the target, it's how it's used. And in the paper released by the Royal College of Emergency Medicine here yesterday, one of their myths was that the 4-hour target is a distraction. What they pointed out was that it allowed a focus. So some of the things that we have done in Scotland to try and tackle this is the majority of our accident emergencies do have a co-located GP out-of-hours service. I mentioned before that I think achieving 8 to 8 in every GP practice is something that is so far in the future, it cannot be reckoned as a solution to this. We are unable to fill the GP vacancies we have now. I think telling them that they're going to be working 8 till 8 Saturday and Sunday is not overwhelmingly attractive. And the pilots that have been done have started a report in the last fortnight, and they have reported a very poor uptake. When people want to deal with an out-of-hours problem, they come towards A&E. Rather than try and change the whole population, you can have an easily diverted system once they get there. If you have this, please step next door to our primary care service. So I think we need to look at these solutions, and some of these are working quite well. The other one is health and social care. To get patients out at the end of their journey, they need to be able to get into care. And we need to remember that while there may be extra money given to health and social care through the health side, if at the same time we are cutting local authority budgets, we end up cutting the legs from under the NHS.
Grateful to the Honourable Lady. She's making some very thoughtful comments. I'm following them very carefully. And I agree with her that co-location can work in some places, but clearly it's not going to work everywhere. Would you not agree with me that most cases, perhaps most cases, that attend accident and emergency departments are neither accidents nor emergencies? They're much better cared for by general practitioners. But to do that, GPs need to be trained for that case mix. They need to be incentivised for it. And most importantly, the public needs to be trained too about accessing the proper professional.
I thank you for your intervention. Prior to the movement of out-of-hours GP services under the banner of NHS 24, most local areas had a doctors on call service. In my county of Ayrshire, we had Ayrshire doctors on call. It was local doctors that provided it. It was based within rooms within our A&E departments in our 2 hospitals. The patients very quickly learnt that where they could go, where they could get seen quickly. We also had a car service to allow us to do home visits. And that was actually functioning very well until NHS 24 came and pulled that away. And I think that's actually what we have to get back to, is local GPs, but as part of cooperatives in a focal position. Each practice would not be able to generate enough GPs and enough work to have someone sitting there in that practice all day Saturday and all day Sunday. And I think that is not clear when the Secretary of State talks about 8 till 8. Is he meaning in individual practices or on a regional basis? Because most of the pilots that have started to publish, the GPs in a local area have very quickly made it a doctors on call. And to be honest, I think that has more common sense, will be more sustainable. I think what we also have to look at is the flow within hospitals, not trackers running around bean counting when patients had what done, but actually in front of them, opening the gates, trying to actually look at the bed management, trying to have patients in the right place. All of this cascades back onto staff, and we really are struggling to maintain and recruit staff. We only had a 50% uptake in trainees for accident and emergency, and we are often hemorrhaging senior people, which is just going to exacerbate the problem. So I think we need the co-location of GPs, and we need to look at the exit block. That's exit out of A&E into the hospital, but also out of the hospital.
Speaker, thank you for that. There's a 25% reduction forecast for GPs and practice nurses in the next 5 years. There is a 25%, I can prove it, I've got the stats, a 25% reduction. The cost of law, can people talk, the public talk about the cost of agency staff in hospitals, which is out of proportion. There is also massive increases in costs.
The Honourable Lady, it really is essential that we keep intervention to an absolute minimum. Thank you. Philippa Whitford.
The other problem that is exacerbating patients moving out into hospitals is the fact that the inpatient facilities have been being reduced. Every new hospital seems to replace old hospitals, but with fewer beds. And that was something that the Scottish Government finally accepted from clinical staff, that this was not something that could go on. I know we treat people in a different way. People used to come in and get a hernia done and lie there for a week. My breast cancer patients used to come in and they would be there for 10 days. And that has changed. And that's great for them. But at the same time, we have this inexorable rise of older patients who have complex needs. Now, it's not a problem of living longer, and I do get quite upset at this phrase, the catastrophe of living longer. I would suggest members of the House think of what the alternative is. And I definitely know that at medical school I was given the impression that that was the point. The thing is, what we have is people are surviving their first major illness. They're actually surviving their second major illness, and they may present to someone like me with breast cancer in their mid-70s, and they have 4 comorbidities. That means those patients do not get in and out quickly for elective surgery. They will not get out quickly when something major goes wrong, like a pneumonia, a chest infection. And therefore, we need to stop this downward trajectory of cutting beds, because we will not be able to maintain that, and we will not be able to get the flow of these patients if we go on cutting beds. So to me, I think those are the key things, is the co-location of GPs and an out-of-hour service for out-of-hour issues that would be better dealt with primary care, and also the ability to have enough beds and those beds in the right place. And then finally, to smooth the way of our patients to get out back to their homes. In Scotland, we have free personal care that allows us to keep more people at home and stop them going into hospital. It allows us to take more of them back out. I commend the 5-year forward. A lot of it is very much taken from something that was written in Scotland several years ago called Vision 2020, about integrating health and social care.
On the point of co-location, I'm not aware of the situation in Scotland, but in England, one of the barriers to co-location successfully being implemented is the tariff and the funding mechanism that is involved in England, which makes it not efficient to do so. Could you comment on that point, if that exists in Scotland, and perhaps we can learn from that for England?
Well, as I'm sure the Honourable Lady is aware, we have a totally separate system for which I'm very grateful, in that we do not have tariffs. We have a single NHS. We do not have this system, and therefore we can sit round a table and try and work out a solution. And that is certainly one of my concerns about what the NHS in England faces. And that's where I would veer away from 5-year forward. I think the principle of working together, the principle of integrating health and social care is commendable. And in Scotland, the integration boards started this April, because our Vision 2020 is a few years older. But we face the same challenge. Local authorities are struggling with their budgets, and that can end up actually eating away the health side of that. So these are the things that we should be focusing on. The 4-hour target, as a weekly target to show you the quick response of what is going on in your hospital, I think is still useful. But it should not be used as a stick either to beat staff or to beat ourselves in this House and make public capital. The NHS is too precious for that.
Sarah Wollaston. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow the member for South Ayrshire, and the House should listen to her points about the point of targets. And I'd also like to start by thanking the NHS staff across the UK, and particularly in the context of this debate, those who are working in the 181 emergency departments across England, and to actually also point out that they're under immense challenges. They cared last year for 14.5 million patients, an increase of 500,000 in the last year. But as the Honourable Lady said, this isn't just about numbers, it's about the complexity, and that's what we have to face. And it's a disappointment when those NHS staff watching this debate see it descend into a political sort of diatribe. What they want to hear is constructive diagnosis and solutions from this House, and not this being used as a football. So let's try and move forward in today's debate in that vein and look at the challenges. And of course, this issue is immensely complex. Anyone that tries to say there's a single answer here is just not looking at the scale of the problem. And so in the few minutes that I have, it would be impossible to address all of those. Of course it would. So perhaps today I'd like to just focus on the issue around workforce, because that is key to this, the workforce challenge we face. And those challenges are not just within emergency departments, but the complex interaction across not only primary care, ambulance services, but also our voluntary sector and how they fit into this mix. Because what we know is that around 15 to 20% of those who are seen in emergency departments are better seen in another context. So how do we get that right? How do we get that skill mix right? Well, we need to look at the fact that not everywhere needs the same solution. The solutions in a rural constituency will be very different from the solutions that are right for an urban area.
We also need to look at the challenge that we face across recruitment, retention and retirement. There are many issues here to address. And if we look just, for example, returning back to workforce, as we've already heard, that there is a problem with 50% of those training places not being filled. But there's also the leaky bucket of those leaving the profession. And when we consider the fact that it costs around £600,000 to train to a senior registrar level, somebody working within emergency care, to see those professionals, and the scale of this is enormous, I assure you. The scale of the brain drain that we face, particularly to Australia and New Zealand. How do we address that? And of course, there will always be junior doctors that will want to spend a year working abroad and return with those skills. I don't think we should discourage that, although we could do more to make that a two-way process. But it is the loss of those higher professionals, and it is those higher professionals with their skills in decision-making, not only looking after the most unwell patients within our emergency departments, but actually having the confidence and skills to know when it's safe for them to go home. So these are... Yes, just briefly.
Yeah, absolutely appreciate what the Honourable Member says about the leaky bucket. Would you also agree that every school, every careers advisor should be advising people to go into the NHS with the 300 careers that it offers?
Indeed, and I was going to touch on the issue of skill mix, because it's not only about those higher skilled professionals, but the mix we have within it. And I don't think we should talk that down. We simply cannot manage unless we broaden the skill mix. And if we look at the extraordinary contribution, for example, of healthcare assistants to the NHS and social care, one of the reasons that we lose so many of them is not just about a low-wage economy, it's the lack of access to higher professional development and how we can actually create more of those pathways, assistant practitioners and physician assistants, how we can use them, how we can perhaps bring more pharmacists who, after all, train for 5 years in their specialty, how we can bring more of those into what we do across the NHS. Just one more, very briefly.
Thank you very much for giving way. I just wanted to pick up on the point that she made about healthcare assistants, and would she agree that improving the opportunities for healthcare assistants is a huge opportunity for the NHS at the moment?
It's a huge opportunity, and we must go further with that, and actually continuing professional development across the NHS workforce is part of actually addressing the burnout that we heard about from the Honourable Lady opposite. And we need to do more to address the rotas and to see what it is that is causing all our staff to leave the NHS, because it's not just about pay, it's not just about the allure of working somewhere with a sunnier climate. We can't do much about that after all. But what it is often about is about the work-life balance that they face and how that compares with abroad. And we've got ourselves into a vicious circle of having to rely increasingly on locums to fill those gaps. And that's money far better spent in actually addressing the causes of why we're hemorrhaging so many of our skilled staff abroad onto professions outside the NHS. And we have to be very careful in this House sometimes when we talk about the issues facing and the challenges facing primary care and emergency departments, not to talk this down. We know that for medical students, going into A&E is something that they do find attractive. Let's not further cut off the supply by talking about this in terms of doom and gloom. There are things we can do to improve the working lives of people within accident and emergency, and we should get on and do the job. And I think that this House should do so in a far more constructive frame of mind. It's time to put aside the differences that we have had in the election. We're 5 years to the next election. Let's show an example to those following this debate from outside and look at this entirely in constructive terms. But just returning as well to an issue that was touched on by the Honourable Lady opposite, around 7-day working. And just as she said about not being trapped by targets, let's not be trapped by political dogma and look at what the unintended consequences sometimes can be if we're driven by a mantra that it has to be 8 till 8, 7 days a week in every situation. I used to practice in a rural community. And what I would say is that if we create a system where we make it deeply unattractive to work in small rural practices, if we create a situation where we're diverting resources from the key priorities about 7-day working, which should be to reduce avoidable mortality, to reduce unnecessary hospital admissions. And if we take our eyes off that as being the key priority here, and we actually drive it towards something that means we have to achieve 8 till 8 in every location, what we could find is, as has happened in my constituency, that we find a further recruitment shortfall, and that can translate into real unintentional harms, like, for example, the closure of many beds at Brixham Hospital because the GPs can no longer safely man those inpatient beds. And so, again, we can find ourselves in a spiral of unintended consequences. So let's look at this and listen to the front line, listen to our patients, and make sure that we keep them first and foremost in our minds when we consider what we're doing in the NHS.
Gisela Stuart.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it is an exceptional pleasure to be allowed to speak under your chairmanship. And I hope I'm going to be forgiven for actually returning to the text on the motion, which somehow seems to have slipped the House's mind in the last hour or so. And it was quite specific. But this House notes that hospital A&E departments have now missed the 4-hour A&E target for 100 weeks in a row, and further notes that trusts have predicted record deficits this year. And the government was asked to respond to that, and I do hope that, as they singularly failed to do that at the opening statement, we'll return to that in the closing statement. I have the University Hospital Trust on my patch in Birmingham, where I first met a heart surgeon called Sir Bruce Keogh, and I'm not entirely sure what's happened to him since. I think in terms of the statistics, I've either got the highest or the second highest proportion of constituents who are either doctors who work in the health service. So the NHS and everything associated with it is something I cannot escape. And therefore I thought it was actually useful to have a tracker survey, an NHS tracker survey, which does record whether we are taking the temperature, but over a period of time, how not just the users of the NHS, but also the people who work in the NHS see the service. And it's the results of those tracker surveys which I really want to share with the House very briefly today, because what it shows is that it's not just the people who use the NHS, but also those who work with the NHS are becoming increasingly concerned about the conditions under which they're treated or the conditions under which they have to work. I had about 400 responses to the last survey, and what was quite clear, that 74% of the respondents said they were very concerned about the future of the NHS. And such comments were, I work in a large university hospital, A&E department, and in the West Midlands conurbation we've got quite a number of large trusts, so people may be living in my constituency but actually working in a different trust. The hospital bed occupancy consistently exceeds 99%, with hundreds of well patients in beds unable to be discharged due to inadequate social care. Consequently, the A&E is overwhelmed with patients lying on trolleys whilst I scrabble around trying to get something done. Another comment, my work leaves me worrying about my own health in the future. Another one, staff shortages on wards, which leads to using more agency staff. They're wasting money and an unnecessary focus on management. Staff are stressed due to doing more shifts to make ends meet. Finally, all parties want better 24-hour access, but there are not enough trained doctors, especially GPs, coming through the system, and too much money is spent on bank staff and locums. That's not political scaremongering. That is what people who work in the service have said as a response to that. And we have to face up to this. You know, it's kind of no good us sitting here and pretending that we have no control over events. The NHS are political decisions, because on an annual basis we make a decision on how much money we spend on it. And that means there has to be some element of control. And when I then look at a trust like UHB, who say emergency department activity has continued to rise, with the trust passing the 102,000 emergency department attendances a year. That's an increase of 4.9%. These are enormous numbers. One hospital, 102,000 emergency admissions. And it is year on year going up. And that then takes me to the targets, because I know the targets are difficult in a sense. But I do remember when we introduced them, it was about the only way we could get good consultants to change the way they were doing things, because they were kept saying that's the only way of doing it. So we said, let's try with targets. And if you then have in the West Midlands a position where, if you look at the last current stats, you look at the 4 hours waiting for 4 hours or less, what they've achieved, and you find that Walsall Healthcare Trust, 95%, UHB, 95%, but Coventry and Warwickshire, 79%, Worcester Acute, 81%, North Staffordshire, 87%. That tells you that there's something going on which is not quite right. And I would have thought that debates like today ought to start by saying both sides agree that there's something going on out there which is not quite right. You know, these figures aren't just inventions. They tell us that's the trend, and how do we address it now? Now, the government got rid of NHS Direct. 111 did not replace it. It's no good the minister shaking said, I set up NHS Direct. And the big thing was they were trained nurses. They weren't call handlers. And the whole point why they were managed to deal with demand was because the person on the other end of the phone could make a clinical decision, not just pass it on. So we had these knock-on effects. And I would have hoped that at least at some stage during the next 2 hours of what is left, what's on the order paper is addressed. The trend is in the wrong direction. We need to look at what we do about it, because people are waiting longer, and the hospital deficits which are facing us are going to be horrendous, and it will be a problem for all of us.
Gordon Henderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a delight to follow the Honourable Member for Birmingham Edgbaston, who made some very interesting points. When I read this motion, the thing that struck me most was if I'd just stepped off of the Mars to Earth Express, I'd have believed that Britain's National Health Service was a total disaster and that nothing was being done to improve the services being delivered. But of course that is simply not the case. Yes, there are still problems in the NHS, particularly in some of our larger general hospitals, such as Medway Maritime Hospital, which provides services for my constituency, including A&E cover. Medway Maritime has faced big challenges for a number of years, including under the last Labour government. And one of those challenges was a failing A&E department. There are a number of reasons for those challenges, including the limitations of the site on which it's located and the demography of the Medway towns in general. Last year, those challenges came to a head, and Medway Maritime was put into special measures. Now, following the appointment of a new chief executive and new trust chairwoman, and with the buddying arrangements in place that have seen the Guy's and St Thomas's NHS Foundation Trust provide Medway with advice and expertise, the hospital is beginning to see some improvement. Of course, much more needs to be done before Medway Maritime will be able to provide my constituents with the house service they deserve and to which they're entitled. There is general agreement that one way of relieving the pressure on the hospital is by transferring more of the services it provides into the community. In my constituency, I have two excellent community hospitals, Sittingbourne Memorial Hospital and Sheppey Community Hospital, which both provide local people with a very good service, albeit a limited range of healthcare needs. And I'd like to see the services they provide expanded. OK, we're never going to see a fully fledged accident and emergency department in Sittingbourne and Sheppey. But there's no reason why my two community hospitals cannot provide other services, and I'll mention a couple of those later in my speech. Madam Deputy Speaker, the opposition motion today includes the following statement. The pressures on hospitals is a consequence of declining access to out-of-hospital services under this government. Well, there are a number of things going on in my neck of the woods that belie that statement. There are a number of initiatives and pilots taking place that in the long term will benefit not only my constituency, but the wider NHS. And let me tell you about a couple of them. Last week, I met with managers from the South East Coast Ambulance Service, CCAMS, who told me about the Vanguard initiative in which they're involved in Whitstable, which is just outside my constituency. The initiative is one of several nationwide that will provide specialist out-of-hospital care in the local community. A part of that initiative sees a CCAMS paramedic team, led by a specialist paramedic, working with local GPs to provide people with home treatment rather than being taken to hospital. CCAMS are keen to replicate that model in other areas, including the Isle of Sheppey in my constituency.
Would the honourable member give way?
I'm happy to give way.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would the honourable member agree with me that with home treatments, the patient becomes the patient expert, and that's another way forward of local solutions and community helping themselves?
Yes, I very much agree, and I'm going to come on to that in a moment. I'm just interested to try and get the model on the Isle of Sheppey, and I very much hope that the NHS England will see the merit in this initiative and provide the necessary funding to CCAMS. Madam Deputy Speaker, I mentioned earlier the excellent Sittingbourne Memorial Hospital in my constituency, and it too is running a pilot that I believe should be extended into other areas. In December last year, a wound medicine centre was opened in the memorial. It's a specialist service for patients across Swale who have chronic, complex or surgical wounds. It is operated under the care of the Kent Community Health NHS Trust and is a centre that uses telemedicine, which sees community nurses visiting patients in their home. By using mobile computer tablets to photograph wounds, the nurses are able to send pictures back to specialists who are based in Sittingbourne Memorial and provide an instant professional opinion. The system can also track the progress of healing wounds and use the data to work out the best treatment option, including the correct type of dressing, something that has the potential to save the NHS thousands of pounds in the wasted procurement of unnecessary dressings. Last month, I was honoured to open the HEM ultrasound clinic in my constituency. It's a new unit that provides a wide range of ultrasound scans. It's the first static clinical ultrasound service in Medway and West Kent. And though it's a private clinic, it has just been contracted to Medway Maritime to help bring down its waiting lists. HEM is currently undertaking an average 35 scans on behalf of the hospital every day, 7 days a week. The cost to the NHS for the clinic service is the same as if the hospital undertook the scans itself. Now, for those who accuse the government of wanting to privatise the NHS, let me say that using facilities such as HEM is not about privatising the NHS. It is about the sensible use of private facilities to supplement NHS treatment and reduce waiting times for worried men and women. Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to just mention one particular thing that is a concern of me. My local Swale Clinical Commissioning Group is led by an excellent team. Members of that team are fully committed to providing local people with more local services in order to reduce pressure on Medway Maritime. But Swale CCG is one of the smallest in the country, and its size presents it with big challenges, as does the historic health deprivation in some of the wards in my constituency. Last year, Swale CCG received an above-average increase in its budget, and I'd like to take this opportunity to urge the government to ensure it receives an above-average increase again this year. Thank you very much.
Paula Sherriff.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is the ultimate honour to be here today to deliver my maiden speech as a Member of Parliament for Dewsbury, Mirfield, Denbydale and Kirkburton. To every man, woman and child living in my wonderful constituency, I promise to be your champion and stand up for you at every opportunity. I warmly congratulate my fellow new members for their excellent and eloquent contributions, and I continue to enjoy my whistle-stop tour of the UK through their speeches. In keeping with tradition, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the input made by my predecessor, Simon Reevell. I wish him well for the future. The suffragette movement fascinated and inspired me from a young age, and visiting the cupboard where Emily Wilding Davison hid in order to be included in the census as a resident of this building reminded me of the ongoing struggle that women have both in society and in politics. It is refreshing that 65% of the new Labour intake are female, but there is a lot more to do, and I look forward to contributing to that cause. As James Brown famously sang, it's a man's world, but it ain't nothing without a woman or a girl. It is therefore a particular privilege to be the first female MP elected in the constituency since Anne Taylor, who now sits in the other place. Every corner of the constituency still holds great affection for Anne, both for her unstinting commitment and her no-nonsense approach. I have big shoes to fill, and I thank Anne for the generosity of her advice and support, and I aspire to make her proud. On the subject of inspirational women, it would be remiss of me not to mention Betty Boothroyd, born in Dewsbury, the daughter of textile workers, who broke new ground by becoming the first woman to be elected as one of the Speaker's predecessors. The Dewsbury constituency is a wonderful place to live, work and indeed play. Dewsbury itself is often referred to as the heavy woolen district, a nod to the manufacture of heavyweight cloth, which saw a significant population of South Asian origin relocate here in the late 50s, many of Kashmiri and of Gujarati heritage. Indeed, the town maintains a rich manufacturing industry and has something of a monopoly in the bed and mattress industry. In common with many other northern market towns, Dewsbury is currently struggling economically, with the town centre crying out for regeneration. It is therefore most welcome that Dewsbury has been earmarked as an enterprise zone. Dewsbury is also famous for its hospitality and warmth of welcome. It is perhaps unique in that upon visiting a constituent's home intending to stay a short time, you are greeted with a 3-course banquet and an invitation to the family wedding. Many of you may have shed a tear watching Mushy overcome his stammer on Educating Yorkshire, the fly-on-the-wall documentary filmed at Dewsbury's own Thornhill Academy. The town of Mirfield has strong socialist roots. The Community of the Resurrection, an Anglican religious community for men, was founded in 1898 and hosted Keir Hardy and Emmeline Pankhurst in its incredible outdoor amphitheatre. Denbydale and Kirkburton comprise of a number of small villages and arguably boast of some of the finest scenery in Yorkshire, or, as it is better known, God's own county. I always know I'm near home when I catch sight of the splendid Emily Moor Mast, the tallest freestanding structure in the UK at 1,084 feet. Many will know that I'm a trade unionist, having previously acted as a shop steward and equalities officer. I will continue to seek to strengthen the bond between the Labour Party and the trade union movement. Trade unions were instrumental in creating the Labour Party to fight for working people in Parliament, and in this time of insecure employment, zero-hour contracts and exploitative labour, unions have never been needed more in the workplace. And the voice of working people has never been needed more in Parliament. And this government's shameful attempt to weaken that collective voice should be universally condemned throughout this House. I must also acknowledge my parents, Barbara and Michael, who taught me that you don't have to go to university to achieve your dreams and to never give up on your principles, maintaining the courage of conviction. I'm proud to bring over 20 years' experience on the front line of our public services to this Parliament. After some time working with victims of crime, I worked in a frontline healthcare role for 13 years prior to taking my seat in this place. The last 2 years of this were challenging, as the service I worked within was privatised. On my first day working for Virgin Care, I was advised that my political beliefs did not fit with the company objectives.
Shame. That's great.
As my beliefs were free healthcare at the point of need and patients always before profit, this affirmed my fears that the health service was moving away from its fundamental principles. I shall have more to say about Virgin Care in future debates, Madam Deputy Speaker. I will also continue to campaign tirelessly for a fully renationalised NHS, and on the subjects of today's debate, I will fight for the future of Dewsbury Hospital, which remains under threat of significant downgrade, with an accident and emergency service which is literally fighting for its life. Dewsbury has many challenges ahead over the next 5 years, not least in the growing inequality we now see in our country. I intend to use my time diligently as Dewsbury's Member of Parliament to redress this and fight for the fairer, more equal society that my constituents deserve.
Maria Caulfield.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And firstly, may I start by congratulating the Honourable Member for Dewsbury on what was an eloquent maiden speech. And it's great to see another strong woman in the House. I would like to start off speaking on this debate. I'm mindful of time, and while I would love to talk about issues around GP access and hospital finances, I am going to concentrate my points on the A&E target, in particular the 4-hour wait target of 95%. And I speak on this debate today as a nurse, and as a nurse who has worked in A&E, actually under the last Labour government, when the 4-hour target was actually introduced. I'm hoping that my clinical experience will be used to inform this debate and to take it forward. And in the short time I have, there's 4 key points that I would like to raise around A&E targets and the 4-hour wait. Firstly, like my other colleagues who have spoken, the Honourable Member for Ayrshire and my Honourable friend from Totnes, I am not a fan of targets, and as a healthcare professional, I found them increasingly frustrating. They're great as a tool, but they're being used as a political stick to beat healthcare workers and the system with. And in particular, if you look at the 4-hour target, there is actually no clinical rationale why 4 hours was ever chosen. And if you look at someone who waits more than 4 hours, say 30 minutes, there is no evidence that either their morbidity or their mortality is actually compromised. And likewise, someone who waits 3 hours and 30 minutes, there's no evidence to say that their care is actually any better than someone who waits 4 hours. So actually the 4-hour rule or the 4-hour target is actually not that helpful. And I'll give you a good example. I won't take any interventions due to the time restriction. I'll give you a good example. When I worked in A&E as a nurse on a busy night shift, an elderly gentleman was brought in. He'd fallen at home and broken his hip. And he was put in the middle of, and this was under Labour, he was put in a corridor while he was waiting. At 3 hours 30, he did call over to me and he said, nurse, I desperately need to go to the toilet. And I had nowhere to put him. The best that I could do was to wheel a curtain around his trolley. And there, in the middle of a busy hospital corridor, with his war medals on his chest, he went to the toilet. Now, he did get seen within 4 hours. That box was ticked and he was deemed to get good health care. But I wasn't particularly impressed with that care. So let's not kid ourselves that meeting that target means that the patient experience is good and that actually the outcome is even better. The second point I would like to make, and why I'm worried about this discussion is being used as a political football, is that this 4-hour target is not seen in context of the greater picture. If you look at other targets, you will see that more and more patients, even with the increase in numbers attending A&E, are having their treatment within 4 hours. And if you look at the clinical outcome of their disease, which surely is the most important thing, if you look at patients who have had heart attacks, actually the outcomes in terms of morbidity and mortality have improved. If you look at patients who've had strokes, they've also had better outcomes, and for trauma victims too. So actually, despite the 4-hour target maybe not being met within the last 100 weeks, actually outcomes for patients are actually improving. And this should be something to be welcomed and to congratulate our NHS staff on achieving that. In addition, if this debate is a serious debate about A&E services and about the whole of the United Kingdom, which surely this is what this House is here to represent, then why are we not looking at the rates in Scotland of only 87%, in Labour-run Wales of 83%, and in Northern Ireland of 79%? Surely that the reason for this debate is as a political attempt, and I find that as a healthcare worker myself very distressing. And it's interesting to hear from those of us who have worked in the NHS that we find that the 4-hour target is a useful tool, but it should not be used as a political stick. I will.
I'd like to know where you got the figure for 87%. Ours shows 92.6%, and we do measure it every week.
Well, the figure I was given was actually by the Nuffield Trust, so that's the figure that I was given. But to bring... So it is an NHS figure, yes. in an attempt to move this debate forward, I think it's really important that if all members of this House are serious about tackling A&E issues in terms of the number of patients that are using the service, then we need to look at the figure that also says that 15% of patients who go to A&E could have treatment elsewhere in local community facilities. And the ideas that the government are bringing forward around a 7-day-a-week health service have to be looked at seriously. And if members opposite are serious of working with healthcare professionals to improve the experience of patients, then surely they should be welcoming the issue of out-of-hours services to take that pressure off A&E. But what I find most distressing about the motion that's being put forward is it's full of criticism, it's full of complaints, but actually there are no solutions. So please, my plea to you is that we work together for the benefits of the patient, so that we're not having patients who are ticking those boxes of 4 hours, but actually their care is being compromised. We only have to look at the North Staffs example of where that target was met time and time again of 4 hours, and yet behind the scenes there was terrible incidences happening. Let's stop playing a political football with the NHS and start working together. Let's start working together, and I would really welcome the attempts from all members of the House to work together with the government to deliver out-of-hours services and take that pressure off A&E and the staff that work there.
Iain Wright. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is the first opportunity I've got to welcome you to the chair. I'm extremely pleased to see you, what I think is in your rightful place in this House. Can I also pay tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Dewsbury, on making what I thought was an excellent speech in a very talented 2015 intake. Far too talented for my liking, I'm afraid to say, Madam Deputy Speaker. She's already shown a strong reputation for standing up for her constituency, often in the face of terrible attacks, and in terms of fairness and tolerance and standing up for decency in public services. She's a strong asset for this House, and I welcome her here. Madam Deputy Speaker, the issue of accident and emergency services is an important one for Hartlepool, because we in Hartlepool lost our A&E in August 2011. This closure has been felt very deeply by my constituents, who now have to travel to North Tees for accident and emergency services some 13 miles away. Given the appalling provision of public transport in my area, the low level of car ownership, the relative levels of deprivation, this is too far for far too many of my constituents.
Will the honourable member give way? Thank you. I wondered if you would... Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wonder if you'd give comment on further implications of this below the River Tees, because where I am in South Tees, we've seen, despite the best efforts of our NHS staff, we've seen waiting times increases, and particularly the target in A&E continues to be missed. And I wondered if he'd give comment on what the impact of the closure of his A&E hospital is on my constituency.
Well, I think my honourable friend, Madam Deputy Speaker, makes a very important point, because if you have fewer A&E departments, it puts further strain on other parts of the system, such as other A&Es at James Cook, and actually in other parts of the NHS, such as ambulance services as well. They are queuing up outside James Cook, and they haven't got the throughput that they need. So I think it's important that Hartlepool sees a return of A&E back to the town. Given the level of health inequality, as well as a higher proportion of older people relative to the rest of the country, I think there's a greater risk of accident, and therefore perhaps it's fair to say greater reliance on A&E than perhaps other areas. Now, I'll be very frank, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is not a party political point at all. The closure was based upon clinical safety factors. The number of medical staff to cover 2 rotas at both Hartlepool and Stockton was deemed insufficient, and the supervision of junior medical staff was deemed inadequate as to not meet modern guidance criteria. Adequate staffing in order to make sure that accident and emergency can return to Hartlepool will require additional resources provided for my area. North Tees, certainly, I'll just make this point and I certainly will. North Tees and Hartlepool NHS Foundation Trust has a financial deficit of £4 million, which is expected to worsen over the coming years. Give way.
Thank you very much. Thank you. The Royal Free Hospital in my constituency will once again face pressure during the coming winter months in the A&E and other services. Does the honourable member agree with me that the extra winter NHS funding should be allocated sooner rather than later so that hospitals can start planning? And does he agree that she should be included in the forthcoming budget?
I think my honourable friend makes a really important point, Madam Deputy Speaker. The additional resources that she mentioned with regards to the North East region, we weren't provided with anything, given the levels of health inequalities and given the points about additional pressure on resources. Lynn Hodgson, Director of Finance at the Trust, has said that the whole system is stretched financially. The situation is so bad, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the Trust has recently taken out a loan of £2 million. Now, that's not for investment into health services. It's not helping to try and pump prime return to A&E in Hartlepool. It's able to pay the wage bills of current staff. Now, when an organisation is having to borrow to meet obligations for something as fundamental as monthly pay packets for staff, there's something very fundamentally wrong with the system. I'm here to argue for services to return to the town, but given the precarious finances of the Trust, I'm fearful that more services will move further away or simply cease to operate, putting further pressures on the local health economy, such as James Cook, and other parts of health and social care. So I ask the Minister, what will the Government do to ensure that North Tees and Hartlepool Trust's finances are given a more secure footing, whilst at the same time allowing such essential services for Hartlepool to return back to the town? Now, as I said earlier, Madam Deputy Speaker, I fully accept that clinical safety for A&E services is paramount, and I'll never argue against that. But I also have to question the model of acute accident and emergency services in my area. Over the past 2 decades or so, there's been a tendency to centralise services at North Tees, to the detriment of patients from Hartlepool and slightly further away in South East Durham. The Momentum programme was going to centralise services onto a single site, culminating in a new hospital at Wynyard that would serve the populations of Hartlepool, Stockton, Easington and Sedgefield. The Government has made it perfectly obvious through their actions that Wynyard is not going ahead. Together with this, the NHS England's 5-year forward view shows that smaller hospitals can actually thrive. Indeed, we see that across the region and across the country. Darlington, with a population only slightly larger than mine and coming under the County Durham and Darlington NHS Foundation Trust, is able to maintain an A&E. Hexham has a population not of 92,000 like in Hartlepool, but of 13,000. But that's able to maintain an A&E within Hexham General Hospital. So clearly, Madam Deputy Speaker, centralisation is not the answer everywhere, and different clinical models and reconfigurations are available to allow smaller towns to retain their A&Es. I want the... Very briefly, I will, yes, certainly.
Thank you. Thank you for giving way. On that point, do you not agree with me that there needs to be more transitional care with step-up and step-down facilities, and also to address the skill mix of across different clinicians in those facilities?
I think that's incredibly important. I started with staffing and I will end with staffing. But the point that I really want to make is I think, an incredibly vital one, which is this. I want this to be the approach for Hartlepool. I think the Minister, when he was talking on the front bench at the dispatch box, was talking about local solutions. The people of Hartlepool want this to be the approach. Hartlepool Borough Council want this to be the approach. I, as the MP for Hartlepool, want this to be the approach, but it's not being heard. Now, I understand there's always tensions between the wishes of the public and where health services are located and the essential requirements of clinical safety. But as I mentioned already in examples, Madam Deputy Speaker, there are other ways. The local trust is simply not listening. So given that the people of Hartlepool want this, I want this, and the local authority, regardless of political complexion, want this. What will the Government do to ensure that in the shaping of local accident and emergency services, the voices of local people and their democratically elected representatives are genuinely heard? As I said to my honourable friend, Madam Deputy Speaker, I started my remarks about staffing and I want to finish on them. Now, I hope I've made clear to the House I want to see A&E return to Hartlepool. But it's clear that there would be reduced pressure on acute services if there was more access to primary care. Hartlepool has a low GP per head of the population, with 63 GPs per 100,000 population, significantly lower than the North East regional average. Only Stockton is lower, and lower than the average in England. Greater access to GPs, better integration of all health and social care services has to be the way forward. But this also includes giving the people of Hartlepool what they want, and that is simply this: a fully functioning hospital in the town and an accident and emergency department at its very heart.
Henry Smith.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you very much for calling me in this important debate, and may I also join with other right honourable members in welcoming you to the chair. I think this is the first time I've spoken with you being in your place, and it's very good to see. Can I also extend my congratulations to the Honourable Lady, the member for Dewsbury, on her maiden speech, and again, like other honourable and right honourable members, start as well by thanking sincerely the people who work in our NHS and perform such an important task on behalf of the nation's health. When the Shadow Minister, the Honourable Member for Copeland, was giving his introductory remarks to this debate, I intervened on him and I mentioned the fact that in 2005, under a Labour government, and it was a decision made in the then Labour Department of Health, Crawley Hospital lost its accident and emergency unit. And I think in the almost over 6 decades of Crawley Newtown's history, this will have proven to be the worst possible mistake. What it meant was that the people of Crawley, which is at the natural population centre of the Health Trust area, the Surrey and Sussex Health Trust area, actually had to travel up to 10 miles up the road on single carriageway highways to access East Surrey Hospital, and the result of that has been at best inconvenience and at worst a very dangerous situation for many patients trying to reach that hospital. And South East Coast Ambulance Service do sterling work, but it's been a great challenge for them. I'm pleased that over the last 5 years we have started to see hospital services returning to Crawley Hospital. We have now an urgent treatment centre that is open 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and we are about to see a new GP primary access at the Crawley Hospital site in West Green. I was delighted a few years ago to open the new digital mammography unit. We have increased beds, increased staffing numbers at Crawley Hospital, and indeed a new MRI scanner, which I was also pleased to open earlier this year. None of this would have been possible, Madam Deputy Speaker, had it not been for the previous government's commitment to increase funding on the NHS and through the Health and Social Care Act ensure that there are many more locally made decisions by Crawley Clinical Commissioning Group, which means that local doctors and clinicians are able to have far greater influence on the needs of my population, my constituents in Crawley, and that is a very welcome development indeed. I very much support the government's commitment to further invest and increase the funding of the NHS and ensure that GP services are extended for not only the convenience of patients, but also to ensure that we are, as far as possible, diverting those unnecessary attendances at the Urgent Treatment Centre at Crawley Hospital and A&E at East Surrey Hospital. I think that is an initiative that will have a significant impact on reducing the pressure on A&E, and in addition to that, I also support and welcome the government's commitment to ensure that social care plays an important part as well, so that people who shouldn't be detained in hospital any longer, not only for their own health needs but also for the health of the healthcare system, are able to be moved into appropriate care settings so that more capacity can be engendered for A&E. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I just want to mention the future of healthcare in the Crawley area. My constituency contains Gatwick Airport, and next week we will be hearing the results of the Airports Commission into runway expansion. If indeed Gatwick is the choice of the Airports Commission, then an awful lot of infrastructure investment will need to be placed into the area, not only in terms of transport such as rail and roads, but also issues like healthcare. And I think that an absolute necessity for Crawley would be a new acute hospital with full A&E should Gatwick Airport be the final decision that the government make, although for the reasons of infrastructure pressure, I don't think that would be the appropriate location. So very much welcome, Madam Deputy Speaker, what the government has done with regard to supporting our National Health Service and its commitment over this Parliament. And I look forward to playing my part in ensuring that the needs of our patients and the needs of our NHS remain a central priority.
Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, for giving me the opportunity to make my maiden speech during this debate. Earlier this year, our A&E department at Salford Royal Hospital, a flagship of NHS excellence, endured a period of crisis that was not just a symptom of the national shortfall in funding, but of the far wider challenges we face in my constituency of Salford and Eccles. Nonetheless, Salford, Eccles, Swinton and Pendlebury collectively make an amazing place to live, both in terms of the spirit of its people and its ambition to achieve the unthinkable. We have a rich political history. I am a proud socialist, and if any city personifies the struggles of the working class and the labour movement, it is Salford. Salford was pivotal in the creation of the trade union movement, with Salford and Manchester trade union councils founding the TUC in 1868. On the 1st of October 1931, thousands swarmed to Salford Town Hall, where a violent demonstration took place. It came to be known as the Battle of Bexley Square. They were protesting at the 10% cut in unemployment benefit introduced by the new national government. Sadly, we face similar struggles in Salford and Eccles today. Frederick Engels' pioneering work, The Condition of the Working Class, was inspired by the struggles he witnessed in Salford, where he owned a factory and could often be found drinking in the Crescent pub with Karl Marx. Now, members will be delighted to know that Engels' magnificent beard has inspired a climbing wall sculpture in Salford. The 16-foot beard statue, a symbol of wisdom and learning, will stand on the University of Salford's campus. Members will be able to scale the impressive beard to a viewing platform at the top, where they might find time to rest and contemplate. We're a city facing the legacy of post-industrial decline. Members may recall the song Dirty Old Town, penned by Ewan MacColl and later sung, amongst others, by the Pogues, about finding love in 20th century industrial Salford by the Gasworks Wall. The Gasworks Wall still exists today, but Salford's gas industry has largely disappeared, along with our mining community, destroyed in the 1980s, as was our large shipping, engineering and manufacturing base. Thousands of lives, hopes and dreams shattered, generations locked in a cycle of low-paid, unskilled work. We were told that the free market globalisation of industry would eventually see wealth trickle down from the top. We're still waiting. We were a city on its knees, and we can be thankful to the foresight of Salford's Labour councillors who encouraged investment and growth. They championed the transformation of the derelict docks into Salford Quays, now a residential and cultural quarter housing the Lowry Gallery Theatre and Shopping Centre. Again, it was Salford Labour Council and our local MPs that ensured the building of Media City, the new headquarters of the BBC and ITV, against resistance from a southern-based media that saw anything north of the Watford Gap as a social and cultural backwater. I would like to pay tribute also to my predecessor, Hazel Blaze, elected alongside a record number of women MPs in 1997. Hazel is admired by many, including myself, for breaking the glass ceiling, not just for women in Salford, but for women from all working class backgrounds like myself. Indeed, much of Hazel's time in this House was dedicated to promoting schemes that would give young people from disadvantaged areas the chance to forge a career in politics and other vocations. I would also like to honour Iain Stuart, who served as MP from 1997 to 2010 for the now abolished constituency of Eccles. Iain was a proud trade unionist, like myself, who never forgot the poverty and struggles of his childhood. Recently, in his current role as Mayor of Salford, Iain urged the government to rethink the savage cuts to the Salford City Council budget, austerity measures that are neither justified nor necessary. These cuts are now soaring through the bones of our already fragile public services, and they severely impact upon the most vulnerable. Now, it might startle honourable members to hear that life expectancy in the more deprived parts of my constituency are lower than the life expectancy of people living in the Gaza Strip. 30% of children in parts of my constituency live in poverty. Our unemployment rates are above the national average, and our wages for those in work are far below it. Many families are trapped in a cycle of poverty, low paid and insecure work. The gap between rich and poor is now growing at a faster rate than the Victorian era. Wow. Evidence from the world over indicates that health outcomes are linked not just to material poverty but also economic inequality. It reduces social cohesion, leading to more stress, fear and insecurity, which places an even greater strain on our NHS and public services. Our NHS will only truly succeed when we invest in people and their quality of life. That means adequate funding for our public services, decent and affordable housing, well-paid, secure jobs, and a clear and apparent reduction in income inequality between those at the top and those at the bottom. Madam Deputy Speaker, my constituency and its people have a proud socialist history. I intend to use my time in this House to fight for them to have a proud socialist future as well.
James Cleverly.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank you. And before I move on to the comments I'd like to make, can I just pay tribute to an excellent maiden speech by the Honourable Member for Salford and Eccles. Her pride in her hometown is obvious and shone through in a very punchy but very effective maiden speech, and I thank you for giving it. Madam Deputy Speaker, my mother spent most of her professional life as a midwife in Lewisham Hospital, the hospital of my birth. And I used to go to her office and do my homework after I left school. So I was literally born and brought up in Lewisham Hospital. Both my sons were born in Lewisham Hospital, and it's a hospital I love and am proud of. I don't doubt for a second the passion that honourable and right honourable members on the other side of the House have for the NHS. But I would remind them that they do not have a monopoly on passion and respect for the National Health Service. We are today talking about waiting times and the A&E, and there are many complicated and compounding problems, or pressures rather, which drive waiting times in A&E. And this debate could and should have been an opportunity to discuss them and look at solutions and mitigations for them. I was taken by the calm and professional speech made by the Honourable Member for Central Ayrshire. And it was impossible to be in the chamber while she was speaking and not be heavily influenced by the remarks that she made. And if the rest of this speech, and indeed the rest of our time in this Parliament, if NHS debate could be conducted in the manner that she conducted her intervention, I think we would all be in a significantly better place. I won't take interventions because I'm very conscious that a number of people wishing to speak on this matter. The A&E waiting times in the NHS are driven by three factors: the number of people coming in, the time it takes to treat, and the ability to discharge or transfer patients. I don't have time to discuss the process whilst patients are actually in an A&E department. I'll let others with more direct operational experience do that. But it is ridiculous for any of us to pretend that the changes to the GP contracts in 2004 did not have a significant and detrimental effect on waiting times for the A&E. The fact that 90% of GPs chose to opt out of out-of-hours provision must have had an effect on the number of people going to A&E departments. Also, no, I won't take interventions. Also, the fact that the ability to discharge patients back into the community is dependent on the ability to care for them whilst they're in the community means that adult social care must be considered as an absolutely essential, integral part of the A&E mix. Because if general wards are not able to discharge into the community, they are not able to make bed spaces available, and in turn, A&E departments are not able to transfer into other wards within the hospital. So, I pay tribute to the excellent work that was done in the Manchester model, actually putting together NHS provision and adult social care so that this obvious interrelationship between the two can be looked at holistically. I'm happy that some of the members opposite, perhaps only some of the members opposite, welcomed the introduction of the Manchester model. And again, if we could work in a cross-party, collegiate way to learn the lessons from that integrated service model in Manchester and roll that out nationally, then I think we would be in a much better place to look at and subsequently deal with the issues of A&E waiting times. It has been alleged, and I am sure members will all leap to their feet to suggest this is not the case, it has been alleged that members of the party opposite were keen, during the last general election, to weaponise the NHS. No, not my words. Not my words. But this is actually too important an issue. This is too important an issue to turn into a party political football. And I will make this commitment. I will make this commitment.
Order! 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 Sir.
Obliged, Madam Deputy Speaker. I will make this commitment. I will be as critical of my own front bench if I perceive that they are trying to turn this into a political football, as I will of the benches opposite. Money is a very important part of the NHS mix, and I welcome the fact that my government has committed to fund the NHS to the levels outlined by experts in the field. But money is not enough. The GP surgery gave more money to GPs, yet the St Lawrence surgery in my own constituency is still struggling, and therefore forcing a number of people to local A&E services. It's an important issue. Let's discuss it with decorum, and I commend the government's actions in this field.
Andy Slaughter.
Deputy Speaker, I hope you and the House will indulge me if I spend my 6 minutes doing an update on the Shaping a Healthier Future programme, which afflicts West and North West London. I've done it several times in the 3 years since it was announced, to the consternation and disbelief of 2 million people in North West and West London. There's been somewhat a hiatus over the election period. I don't want to be self-indulgent here, because I think it is something that all members would want to pay attention to. It is the biggest closure programme in the history of the NHS, 4 A&E departments out of 9 and 2 major hospitals being substantially downgraded, also seen by many as a prototype for the Keogh review. And I wonder whether, we didn't hear this from the front bench opposite, what's happened to the latest stage of the Keogh review of urgent and emergency care. It was put on ice last year because it was seen as political suicide, proposing the majority of Type 1 A&Es in the country would be downgraded, but it's disappeared from sight, it seems. I hope the reason for that are good clinical reasons. Mention has been made already of the excellent briefing that the College of Emergency Medicine provided to members of this House yesterday. I'm just going to quote 3 statistics that they came up with. One was that the increase in attendances at A&E last year was equivalent to the workload of 7 large A&E departments. The second is that only 2% of A&E attendances are for major trauma, stroke and heart attack patients. And the third is that a maximum of 15% of patients who attend A&E could be seen in a non-hospital setting. And even that must be caveated, because I suspect that quite a lot of the people who do go to A&E are not people who are knowingly accelerating their symptoms or time wasting, but have genuine concerns, perhaps for their children who've got a fever, which could be the flu, but it could be meningitis. And the solution proposed by the College of Emergency Medicine is co-location. They say costly and time-consuming efforts to encourage patients to seek advice on urgent care by telephone or to attend elsewhere have not reduced A&E attendance. Rather than blaming patients for attending A&E when we know they have great difficulty accessing alternatives, we have a completely new approach. We believe the issue will be dealt with by co-location. Now, in the case of many of the hospitals in West London, we already have co-location. That isn't a solution that can be advanced in that way. There are many developments that have occurred in the past 3 or 4 months. One is that Chelsea and Westminster Hospital is about to take over West Middlesex Hospital. Now, that new trust will believe that they can maintain 2 fully functioning Type 1 A&E departments, unless another one is going to close in the area. Why then is Imperial Trust supposed to manage with only one a major A&E service in its 3 hospitals? On the 1st of July, we'll have the closure of Ealing Maternity Hospital. And my honourable friend, the member for Ealing Salford, who couldn't stay for this part of the debate, asked me to raise that specifically because that is a matter of great concern and it will impact on other maternity services in the area. We are still suffering the closures, the effects of the closures of Hammersmith and Central Middlesex A&E from last September, as shown in the 4-hour waiting times at other hospitals, including Charing Cross Hospital, my constituency, which is persistently below target. And yet at the same time, stroke services are being centralised at Charing Cross for at least the next 5 years, moving from St Mary's Hospital, even though the plan is to move them away in due course. In the last 2 years, £33 million has been spent on consultants, just on the Shaping a Healthier Future programme. £12.5 million of that with one consultant, McKinsey's. That's £27,000 a day. That's the equivalent of paying for 300 new nurses. Imperial Trust is spending 1/8 of its staffing budget on bank and agency staff, and the last figures showed it had an £18.5 million deficit. And against this crisis, and it is a crisis in A&E, what is being proposed in relation to Charing Cross, a major emergency hospital in my constituency, is that it's demolished, all its buildings are demolished, that the number of beds are reduced from 360 to 24, and that we lose all consultant emergency services. The growth in population in London, in West London in particular, will go up massively over the next 10 years. That is unprecedented. This is a very, very poor scheme, not just clinically, for the reasons given by the College of Emergency Medicine, but in logistical terms, in spatial terms, and in financial terms. Now, we do have, and I'm very grateful to the Minister for this and the Secretary of State, at last we have the opportunity before summer recess to meet and to discuss these matters in depth, and therefore I say no more about those matters today. I'm looking forward to that opportunity, and I know that the Minister will attend in good faith and will look at the concerns which we all have in relation to the Shaping a Healthier Future programme. These are not idle concerns. These are not and it's obviously in the brief opposite to say, let's not make the NHS a political football. I don't think any of us on this side are making the NHS a political football. As I say, we're not in an election period. We are reflecting the... I will give way.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. I have to say it is a bit rich of members opposite to accuse us of using the NHS as a party political football, when prior to the 2014 local elections, the Ilford North Conservative Association put out a leaflet claiming that King George A&E would not be closing, and before this general election, we were told that there would be a reprieve on the A&E closure, and now we're told by the Chief Exec of the NHS Trust that the closure plan will be published in the next 6 to 9 months. I think that was playing party politics with the NHS cynically.
My old friend makes a very good point. I make sure that every time that I quote what is happening in my local NHS now, I look into the voluminous papers of Shaping a Healthier Future, or what the Imperial Trust Board is actually saying, so that I can be clear that I am saying what is actually happening, not my opinion, not something that comes from a party political standpoint. And I simply wish that the government would listen and would respond in kind. If we don't, and I will give way to my honourable friend.
I apologise for coming late to the speech. The reason I've come late is because outside his hospital, Ealing Hospital in particular, there are 200 people demonstrating at the moment because of the closure of the maternity unit, which will put undue stress upon the local community. He's listened to many of the arguments that have been put forward. None of them stack up with regard to the closure of the maternity unit. Possibly they'll listen to the 200 people that are demonstrating at the moment.
Well, I'm very grateful to honourable friend, and no one does more than he does in a direct and positive way draw attention to the crisis in the NHS in West London. He is someone whose hospital, Hillingdon Hospital, is not closing, but throughout this whole process over the last 3 years has been absolutely steadfast in defending and supporting those of us who are seeing that downgrading in our local NHS service, not just because he's a good comrade, but because he knows the knock-on effects of hospital closures is going to make it intolerable for anybody, for any of those 2 million people throughout North West and West London to have a decent health service. I say no more today, as I know other members are wishing to speak. I thank again the Minister for the opportunity that we will have to come and make our case. And I only say I do hope the government is listening on this. This is the most urgent matter that I've dealt with in my time, my 30 years as a councillor and an MP. It is about the preservation of our NHS service for a substantial part of London's population. These are genuine and legitimate concerns, and I hope the government will listen to them.
Ben Howlett.
Speaker. And I'd also like to lend my congratulations to the 2 new members of Parliament for Dewsbury and Salford and Eccles. I gave my maiden speech a couple of weeks ago, and I know how much of a terrifying experience it is, so many congratulations. As members on both sides of the House may already know, I've watched the NHS provide first-class health care to my mother. She's had a debilitating long-term condition, a musculoskeletal condition, for the last 20 years, and I'm absolutely certain that without the support of the NHS, her pain and suffering would have been an awful lot more. However, having said that, on a number of occasions she's accessed A&E, and she's needed to visit those in order to make her condition a little bit better. And while improvements have been seen, her experiences have been mixed. While I appreciate my family's case is just one example of this care, improvements have been seen, and people from around the UK are facing a mixed picture in terms of the care that they're receiving at A&Es. However, from the outset, I wish to stress and agree with the Honourable Member for Totnes and also for Central Ayrshire that turning this issue into a political football, to be frank, is not helpful, and this is not a new issue. I've worked alongside the NHS for 7 years myself and given advice and support to 4 Secretaries of State now in the Department of Health, both Labour and Conservative, and each have said that they would do all they can to improve A&Es across the UK and that they would do more than their predecessors to cut unnecessary bureaucracy to medical professionals. As I said, this issue is not a new one. Emergency medical professionals have been warning that a hiatus has been on the horizon for a decade or more. I'm therefore pleased that the Secretary of State has recognised the need to look at this issue in a much more serious and holistic way. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, there are a number of myths that have been espoused by the opposition, and I would like to spend some time correcting them on this. The first and most important is that A&E attendance is not because funding has been cut. The Better Care programme, designed to integrate health and social care services between national government and local authorities, is predicted to reduce A&E admissions by 3%. The 111 service, launched in 2013, directs 8% of callers to A&E departments, whereas 30% would have gone to A&E if the service was not available. In addition, £150 million has been provided to fund fund evening and weekend GP appointments through the Prime Minister's Challenge Fund, meaning people can access care through GPs instead of having to go to their A&E. Given this picture, it is absolutely clear that we are not going to be able to provide the high-quality care that is needed without proper investment. And I'm pleased that the Government has decided to take on the report and recommendations of Simon Stevens and invest a further £8 billion into the NHS. This, of course, will have a significant positive effect on A&Es. Last year, the Government invested a record total of £700 million, ensuring local services had the certainty of additional money and time to plan how best to use it. As the College of Emergency Medicine said, this represents the largest annual additional funding yet seen. I know from speaking to the Royal United Hospital in my own constituency of Bath, this additional investment has really helped. While the opposition spend most of their time trying to do down our achievements that my honourable friend for Ipswich espoused in the opening remarks, that the protection of the NHS budget and the additional funding since 2010 has enabled A&E departments' capacity to increase significantly since 2010. And additional funding has paid for 2,500 beds in both acute and community treatment and the equivalent of 1,000 new doctors. There are now almost 1,200 additional A&E doctors, including an additional 400 A&E consultants and 1,700 additional paramedics since 2010. The additional £2 billion being invested in frontline care in 2015 to 16 will go an awful long way to support the NHS into the next winter. My second point really relates to weekly reporting of A&E data. And the opposition will be very much aware that the best healthcare decisions are clinically led, although it seemed like they disagreed with that earlier on. As Sir Bruce Keogh rightly explained in his recent letter to the Chief Executive of NHS England, there is concern that a number of small instances, some targets are provoking perverse behaviours and the complexity of others is obscuring their purpose and meaning. I quite agree with him that the A&E standard has been an important means of measuring people, ensuring people who need to get rapid access to urgent and emergency care, and we must not lose that focus. And I agree with him that we do not need to review the 4-hour standard at this time, and that we need to look at a wider range of measures if we are to drive improved outcomes across the entire system. I totally agree with the suggestion that we standardise reporting arrangements so that performance statistics for A&E, RTT, cancer, diagnostics, ambulances, 111 and delayed transfers of care are all published one day each month. This fits very nicely with the calls from the medical practitioners across the UK for a reduction in the burdens of bureaucracy that have been crippling productivity in the heart of our NHS. One of the key reasons for my brother and his wife leaving this country to practice medicine in New Zealand was this overarching issue of bureaucracy, and I very much hope this plan will show the medical professionals and the patients that we look to improve the quality of data protection. Absolutely.
Grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. I don't know if he had this experience, but during the election campaign, a number of constituents said to me how excellent the services were in A&E. And, of course, we've got a brand new unit at the Lister Hospital. But did he have that experience as well?
I thank the honourable member for his intervention. And yes, absolutely, I did. When I was speaking to countless residents on the doorsteps across the whole of Bath, we found that the quality of the provision that was being provided by the RUH and other hospitals around the rest of the UK was tremendous. And I spent a lot more time than the opposition will do in thanking NHS professionals for the work that they are doing in my own constituency and for the work they're doing around the rest of the UK. I'm coming up to my conclusion, so I won't take that intervention. In summary, Mr. Speaker, in summary, Madam Deputy Speaker, I very much hope that the Secretary of State will continue to fund the investment needed in our A&Es to keep up with the pressures, and think about the need to encourage better access to primary care and community care, and also reduce the burdens of bureaucracy that inflicted our NHS for so long and resulted in my brother and his wife fleeing to New Zealand in order to escape. Thank you very much.
Richard Arkless.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it is indeed a huge honour to be called by you today to make my maiden speech in this very important debate around A&E services within the NHS. As an introduction, I can report with a small measure of glee that NHS Dumfries and Galloway has treated 96.8% of all A&E outpatients within the Scottish Government's target of 4 hours. The NHS remains safe in public hands north of the border. As is customary, I'd like to pay tribute to my predecessor, Mr. Russell Brown. Russell Brown was elected to this House in 1997 upon a tidal wave of Blairite euphoria, ousting the seemingly immovable Sir Hector Munro. My election to this House has absolutely nothing to do with him as a person or as a constituency MP. He was merely a victim of the political reawakening that has occurred all over Scotland and the resultant SNP tsunami. And he was let down badly by his party. My message to Russell is simple. Thank you, Russell, for your tireless dedication to the people of Dumfries and Galloway. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Labour Party have left the people of Dumfries and Galloway and of Scotland. It is not the other way round. My message to the benches adjacent is simple. Can they please get their act together? We had an opportunity to defeat this Tory government last week to create a referendum fairness board, and they blew it. They would rather sit in their hands and vote with the Tories than support an SNP proposal. Ditch the tribal opposition, work with us so we can put this wafer-thin majority to its full test. This SNP group, Madam Deputy Speaker, are determined to dismantle the myths that surround our brand of nationalism. And perhaps I'm in the best position to dispel those particular myths. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm not from a traditional SNP nationalist household. Independence is not an argument that I used to subscribe to. I actually voted no for devolution in 1997, and I only joined the SNP 4 days after the independence referendum. My conversion has been protracted, evidence-based, and not led by blind patriotism. As a dual-qualified lawyer and businessman, I was invited to speak at a town hall debate during the referendum, alongside my friend from South Perthshire and Eccles. A mere 15 months ago, I kept getting invited back, almost 50 times in fact. And here I am, 15 months later, in this world-famous chamber, representing the people of my home region. What a privilege, Madam Deputy Speaker. And a special mention goes to my wonderful wife, Anne, whose dedication to our two young children allows me to take up this privilege in this House. Dumfries and Galloway, or the Scottish Riviera, as I prefer to call it, is a constituency of serene beauty, of abundant wildlife, of vast forestry, rolling hills, and a coastline that stretches almost 200 miles. From my hometown of Stranraer in the west to Wigton, Newton Stuart, and Whithorn in the Machars, to Gatehouse of Fleet, Kirkcudbright, Castle Douglas in the Stuartry, all the way across to Dalbeattie and Dumfries in the east. There is something for everyone. It is a place that I love dearly. We are indeed a resilient bunch. It is and ought to be even more of a tourist mecca, with so many festivals and community initiatives, simply too many to mention in total. But come and visit the book town of Wigton, the artist town of Kirkcudbright, the Wickerman Festival, and watch out for the UK's finest oyster festival in Stranraer, coming soon. We are a region of entrepreneurs, innovators and inventors. We invented the pedal bicycle, we invented electromagnetism, and we gave Christianity to Scotland in the 5th century through St Ninian of Whithorn. Madam Deputy Speaker, Dumfries and Galloway, in my view, is dynamic and growing, with more small businesses employing less than 10 people per head of population than any other constituency in Scotland. A remarkable statistic, given the rural economic disadvantages that we suffer. Small businesses are our largest employers, the lifeblood of our community and the lifeblood of our economy. But they need serious help to fulfil their potential. Travelling throughout my constituency, 3G networks are very rare. 4G is almost virtually non-existent. Fibre optic cables don't reach the outlying areas. This is simply not good enough. Wouldn't it have been fantastic, Madam Deputy Speaker, if 5G was rolled out with 100% geographical coverage in the rural areas of the UK that need the help the most? Places like Dumfries and Galloway. That is the real way that we can rebalance our economy. And that's something I pledge to fight extremely hard for over the coming years. No maiden speech for a DNG MP would be complete, Madam Deputy Speaker, without reference to our national treasure, Robert Burns. Although born in Ayrshire, we in Dumfries and Galloway claim Scotland's national bard as our very own.
We'll lend him to you.
Burns wrote of the River Nith, which runs through the heart of Dumfries. The banks of the Nith were as sweet a poetic ground as I ever saw. It's hard to disagree, Madam Deputy Speaker. Dumfries was inspirational to Burns. He was at his most productive whilst living there, composing classics like Auld Lang Syne and the masterpiece of Tam O'Shanter. However, poverty and hunger were never present in Robert Burns' life. We have food banks in Dumfries and Galloway, not only frequented by the poor, not only frequented by the disadvantaged, but also victims of draconian benefit sanctions, but more importantly, the working poor. People who work full-time yet still find themselves in poverty. In 2015, my constituency, children are going to school hungry. Austerity policies are literally starving our children, not just of a happy childhood, but of a successful future. And indeed, Burns' gratitude of good nourishment was clear. And he said, some him eat, and some would eat that want it. But we him eat, and we can eat. So let the Lord be thanked.
Yeah. Andrea Jenkins. Beg the honourable lady's pardon. The time limit is now 4 minutes. Andrea Jenkins.
Deputy Speaker. First of all, I'd like to congratulate the honourable member from Dumfries and Galloway on his passionate maiden speech. I know how nerve-wracking it can be when you're appearing. But my experience of the NHS, I've experienced really the good and the bad. I've lost a loved one, but I've also seen excellent care that my mum received when she had a recent knee replacement, or my sister received for her MS. Now, my university research dissertation looked at healthcare systems around the world, their per capita spend, and also healthcare outcomes. Now, I can honestly say in my research that no country, no government gets it right 100% of the time. However, I, for one, are proud of our NHS. And I urge the people on the Labour bench opposite, the right honourable members, to stop talking it down and to drop their selective amnesia. Every member in this House has got something to learn from our history in our party, and I for one, would like to see us all pulling together for the NHS. We all have lessons to learn. Let's look at the A&E statistics of the UK. NHS England, as we've already said, 95% is the target. NHS England, run by ourselves, we received 93%. Labour-controlled Wales, 83%. SNP-controlled Scotland was 87%. Well, this is on the figures from NHS Scotland, so maybe you need to check that out. Yep. Well, we've got it here. So my whole point... No, I've got 3 minutes. Thank you very much. Yeah. My whole point is that every member in this House, we've all got lessons to learn. Now, I, for one, think we should be a critical friend. Yeah? We've got to look honestly at what works, what doesn't work, and we need to start showing best practice. Now, if you look at our record, NHS England as the best measured emergency care of any Western nation, we should celebrate this fact. In Yorkshire and Humber alone, we've got 582 more doctors and nurses in 2010. Again, I am celebrating that fact. I've worked for healthcare charities for the last 4 years, and today I met with a patient association, and together we're setting up an all-parliamentary group on patient care. We need to do things in a constructive manner rather than, as we already said, use it for political means. Now, it's only by collective working, including working with patient groups, healthcare charities, but also looking at strong local leadership on a ward-by-ward basis. This is the only way that change can happen. Now, I welcome the government's decision for 7-day NHS. Yes, we need to look how it's managed, but at the same time, it is going to take pressure off our A&E services. So I urge every member in this House, as I've said, I'm going to finish off by saying we need to be the critical friend, we need to be honest and make sure there's a place of consequence when things go wrong and that lessons will be learned. But we also need to celebrate that we have got a fantastic NHS, we're still investing in it, and I urge every member in the House to support that. Thank you.
Rupa Huq.
May I firstly place on record my condolences to the 2 people who tragically lost their lives at Ealing Broadway Station yesterday. I'm sure all members of the House will join me on this. Madam Deputy Speaker, who was it who said, "I think of the emergency nurse practitioner in Surrey, still in her overalls, telling me that closing A&E means an hour-long drive to hospital for some people and potentially lives lost"? Anyone know who said that? It was actually the Right Honourable Member for Witney in 2007. In my constituency, Ealing Central and Acton, this constituency is becoming reality. So we've got 4 hospitals, either 4 A&E units, either having been closed or in the process of being closed. Charing Cross has numerous specialisms, but 55% of the site has been earmarked for luxury housing. You couldn't make it up. Both Hammersmith and Central Middlesex A&Es have already shut their doors. Central Middlesex, brand new, well-rated facility, with people instead being diverted to Northwick Park, over 7 miles away from these 2, and that the government's own CQC has rated as a failing hospital. Government claims that these units have been saved, but their replacement urgent care centres cannot be used for emergencies. They're not staffed by GPs. They're staffed by GPs, not consultants. They don't take ambulances. In short, they're not A&Es. And Ealing Hospital, the honourable member for honourable friend for Hayes has gone now, loses its maternity this month. The last projected birth is today, the 24th. People see that as a precursor as what is happening to A&E there. Ealing Hospital is where I lost my dad in September, so it's a place I know well. I remember it going up in 1979. My dad was nearly 80, he'd been ill for a long time. But when you hear of cases like the 2-year-old in North London who was taken to what they thought was an A&E that had closed down and he died, you know, these kind of things are dismissed as anomalies, and they're going to become more and more frequent, if not the norm. I mean, my own constituency, Mrs. Corsandi, lives in the next road to Central Middlesex Hospital. Yet in November, after its closure, she had a seizure and was taken to Northwick Park. But her daughter Sheppey told me that they discharged her, even though, Sheppey Corsandi, even though she wasn't well enough, it was clear there was no room for her. As I don't drive, she came home in a taxi. She has no recollection of that. She had another fit at the daughter's house, hit her head on the sink, was taken in again, and had a seizure, third one, in front of the doctors. Yeah, they witnessed this. She told me that they were amazing. Out of nowhere, 5 people came, and they were excellent. But they had no time to breathe, let alone answer questions. So, I mean, NHS staff are doing the best that they can, but they are operating in incredibly uphill circumstances.
Will my honourable friend give way?
Okay, I will.
Will my honourable friend recognise that while her urban constituency contrasts quite dramatically with my rural constituency, the bench opposite should recognise the challenging geographical differences between our constituencies, and the reason the Morecambe Bay Trust may run a £26.3 million deficit is because of our challenging rural area.
Yes, my honourable friend makes an excellent point. Another constituent of mine, Mr. Anand, lives near Hammersmith Hospital with a now closed A&E. And I mean, he wrote to me describing what he called near third world conditions, and a queue of 10 ambulances. I mean, NHS North West London has had the worst waiting times in the country, as we witness cutting corners and in a whole process that adds up to its fragmentation and selling off. I mean, these are just 2 examples, and that Tory promise, no top-down reorganisation of the NHS, did not come to pass for my constituents. NHS North West London, my honourable friend for Hammersmith, described 33 million in 2 years that they've spent on consultants. It's 13.2 million this year alone, including Saatchi and McKinsey's, in their programme Shaping a Healthier Future, which the locals see as justifying the closure of hospitals. And don't get me started on that 2010 famously airbrushed poster that proclaimed, "I'll cut the deficit, not the NHS." Yeah. In West London, that just does not ring true. Ealing used to be known for comedy, but what has happened to our NHS locally has gone beyond a joke.
Andrew Gwynn.
Speaker, we've had a good debate this afternoon, and I'd like to firstly pay my tribute and congratulate those honourable members who have made their maiden speeches during the course of today's debate. In particular, I'd like to congratulate my honourable friends, the members for Dewsbury and for Salford and Eccles. I have to say, having been a former student at the University of Salford, I hadn't realised until today that I've followed in Marx and Engels' footsteps by supping in the Crescent too, so you learn something new every day. And also the honourable member for Dumfries and Galloway, who made his maiden speech too. I want to congratulate them for their contributions today. It's clear that all 3 will make their presence felt in the House of Commons in the coming years. Madam Deputy Speaker, I also want to thank the other members who have contributed today, in particular my honourable friends, the members for Birmingham, Edgbaston, Hartlepool, Hammersmith and Ealing Central and Acton, the Honourable Lady for Central Ayrshire, who leads on health issues for the SNP, and on the government benches, the Honourable members for Totnes, Sittingbourne and Sheppey, Lewes, Crawley, Braintree, Bath, and Morley and Outwood. I have to say that many of the members opposite stuck very closely to the Conservative Policy Research Unit paper, a copy of which I was conveniently sent earlier today, and I congratulate them on being so loyal to their whip's office. It would be very remiss of me, Madam Deputy Speaker, not to place on record my own tribute to the doctors, the nurses, the healthcare assistants and the other dedicated NHS staff who provide such extraordinary and professional care. Many members of this House that have been here certainly for a number of years will know that I had a run of bad health about 5 years ago, and as a result I became far more familiar with my own local hospitals, Tameside General and Stepping Hill, than I'd hoped to, even considering my position as a constituency Member of Parliament and a Shadow Health Minister. And I have experienced the very best of NHS care. And if I'm honest, Madam Deputy Speaker, I also experienced some care that didn't meet the standards that we perhaps expect of our NHS too. I do know, however, that we have a workforce that is completely dedicated and caring. But the House should be in absolutely no doubt that they are under a great deal of pressure, sustained pressure, that has been building over the past 5 years. And the facts need to be laid out in the open, and ministers do need to be challenged on their fiction. They've made all sorts of desperate promises to get them through an election campaign, and now they need to show where the money is going to come from to pay for those promises and set out exactly how they are going to deliver them. And yet, what have ministers been doing since the general election? Now, I don't disagree, Madam Deputy Speaker, with Professor Sir Bruce Keogh's decision to improve the publication of data for mental health and for cancer. That's welcome. But I do disagree with what this government intends to do in relation to A&E data. Instead of dealing with the pressure facing the NHS in England, they have decided to stop publishing weekly data about those pressures. I will give way.
Thank you very much for giving way. Will the honourable gentleman acknowledge that the NHS leads the world in transparency, and also acknowledge that excessive focus on one data point, the 4-hour target for A&E, is detrimental actually overall to patients?
Well, of course, it was the last Labour government that started that transparency with heart and stroke data, and we should remember that. But I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, we all know what's going on here. There could be no clearer sign of the Tories' failure on the NHS than the fact that hospital accident and emergency departments have now missed their own 4-hour target for 100 weeks in a row. This is a landmark failure, a failure which the Prime Minister promised he wouldn't return to. The reality is that this government caused this crisis by making it harder to see a GP and stripping back social care services. Let's be under no illusions, and the Secretary of State can chunter, social care cuts are NHS cuts. The government made damaging mistakes that have seen the numbers going into hospitals soar, and the best things that they could do is to admit it and to explain what they are going to do to fix this problem. I won't now, I've not got time. It's stunning that their only solution is to spin their mistakes and to make the NHS less transparent. Yep. Let me briefly come on to nurse staffing problems. Yeah. Only this week we have seen yet another example of poor policy coming out of the Department of Health. If they insist, along with the Home Office, that migrants not earning £35,000 after 6 years must go home, then this will cut a hole right through the middle of our NHS. The Royal College of Nursing estimates that 6,620 nurses will have to leave the country by 2020 because of the government's failure to train adequate numbers of nurses in the UK. These nurses will have cost almost £40 million to recruit from overseas. People coming from other countries to work in the NHS make a huge contribution, and our health service would not be able to cope without them. But this is now a mess entirely of ministers' own making. The short-sighted cuts to nurse training in the early years of the last Parliament left NHS hospitals with no option but to recruit from overseas or to hire expensive agency nurses. This is also one of the main reasons why many hospital trusts are now in deficit. That was an absolutely profound error, and I hope that the Minister will acknowledge this in her closing remarks. As ever with this government, it's patients and taxpayers who will pay the price for the Prime Minister's mismanagement of the health service. And there are further mistakes when it comes to GP access. It stands to reason that if you make it harder to see a GP, you will be more likely to end up in hospital. And as we've heard in this debate, the reasons for the crisis are many, but it is the lack of access to GP services that appear to account for much of the problem. No amount of obfuscation and massaging of the figures can hide the fact that this government made it harder to get a GP appointment. All members will know of constituents who have had to phone their doctors only to be told that no appointments are available and that they should ring back the next day, which they do only to experience the same problem again. That they end up in frustration in A&E should not come as any shock. The Prime Minister has now repeated his 2010 promise to provide access to GPs 7 days a week. Madam Deputy Speaker, he can't even provide 5 days a week. And when patients want up-to-date information on how their local hospital's performing, this government plans to publish the data less frequently. Madam Deputy Speaker, I hope the government will now see sense, and I commend our motion to the House.
Jane Ellison.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Time is rather short, but I do want to at least start by acknowledging one or two things. First of all, nice to see at least one signatory to the Labour non-grandstanding pact on the front bench for the closing speeches, if not the opening ones. But more importantly, if I could just pick up the fact there have been, I think, 3 maiden speeches during the course of this debate. The Honourable Member for Salford and Eccles, the Honourable Member for Dumfries and Galloway, and the Honourable Member for Dewsbury. The Honourable Member for Dewsbury mentioned James Brown. The Honourable Member for Salford and Eccles mentioned the Pogues. So we've had a rather musical theme running through it. And indeed, the Honourable Member for Dumfries and Galloway took us to the Scottish Riviera via a wonderful Burns quote. Maiden speeches that we all enjoyed very much. We've also heard some thoughtful speeches, Madam Deputy Speaker, from people with experience in the service themselves. And for those who are new to this House, I can only say that those of us who were here in the last Parliament do have a sense of déjà vu about this debate and indeed about this motion. But we do want to try and move on from this. The mandate that the public gave us in the election for our record on the NHS, our commitments to safeguard its future, and I think importantly our honesty about accepting the challenges that lie ahead and the need to address the long-term solutions. And again, a number of honourable and right honourable members have alluded to those. I think the public did see through the tired attack from the opposition at the election, and they saw that we were the party acknowledging the long-term pressures, but also, importantly, and this remains the big challenge for the opposition, we also were the party that committed the resources the NHS says that it needs to continue to be the best health service in the world. And I think, as the chairman of the Select Committee, and I congratulate her on her re-election, she said the election is behind us and we do need to try and move forward and look at those areas where there is consensus and remember the impact that debates in this House have on the wonderful staff in our NHS. But let's get on the record where we are with the A&E service. The NHS in England achieved 94.9% of people in A&E being seen, treated and discharged in 4 hours. And that point was very well underlined by the honourable lady who spoke for the SNP from Central Ayrshire, who made a very, very thoughtful and measured contribution, which we all enjoyed very much. And she spelled out just what an achievement that is to do that and deliver that in that target. Now, when it comes to the change in reporting, the changes from weekly to monthly A&E performance reporting are, as others have said, based on the clinical advice of Professor Sir Bruce Keogh, the NHS Medical Director. Far apart from reducing transparency, these will increase it, as from August, NHS England will be publishing key NHS performance data together, including more frequent reporting of cancer rates, something widely welcomed by cancer charities. And the change is not only clinically based, but supported by the Royal College of Emergency Medicine, the Nuffield Trust, the NHS Confederation and the Patients Association. So the opposition front bench is way out of line with all of those bodies when it comes to their criticisms of this change. There's also been talk of deficits in NHS providers, of course cause for concern, but we're taking action on those deficits. Exactly the point I made at the general election. We talked about what we can do to address some of these long-term challenges. My honourable friend who opened the debate mentioned a number of the specific measures that are being taken to address trust deficits and to help them back to a better situation. When it comes to GP access, the facts are that 4 out of 5 people are able to get an appointment when it's convenient, and we're building on that through investing £175 million in extending GP access. By March next year, the PM Challenge Fund will cover 18 million people getting extended hours and weekend appointments if they need them. Now, I know from what we've heard from honourable members that GPs and other health professionals are responding positively to the challenge that circumstances set them. I was very interested to hear of the innovation in Sittingbourne and Sheppey that we heard from my honourable friend. We heard in Crawley about a focus on increased access to mammography. And there were many other great examples of how the service is innovating. To meet demand, we have 1,200 more GPs than in 2010. But the Secretary of State spoke only last week about a new way forward for GPs and an increased focus on the under-doctored areas, something that came out from a number of members' contributions, including the Honourable Member for Hartlepool. Providing the funding to support the NHS's own 5-year forward view has only been possible, however, because of our long-term economic plan. And we remain committed to listening to and supporting the NHS as they work through the detail of delivery of the 5-year forward view. Building on a record of achievement, compared to 5 years ago, our NHS performs over 1 million more operations, has 9,100 more doctors, 8,800 more nurses, and it sees, treats and discharges 3,000 more people within that 4-hour target. These are real achievements that we intend to build on in this Parliament. It's a great track record. But, however, the NHS simply cannot go on treating more people at this rate. So, as Simon Stevens has said, we need to go up several gears on prevention, a subject I hope we return to at another time. There is growing political consensus, Madam Deputy Speaker, over the need to integrate health and social care. Honourable members have spoken about that today. But this government has started to do it. It's all right to talk about it, but with the Better Care Fund, on this side of the House, we've actually started to do it. Madam Deputy Speaker, a strong NHS does need a strong economy, and that remains the unanswered question, both from the election and in this House, every time the opposition sponsor one of these debates. We are committed to supporting our NHS, not running it down, backing the NHS's own plan for meeting the challenges and opportunities of the future. That isn't a promise matched opposite, and the public knew that, and it remains the elephant in the room for the opposition front bench. So as we go forward, that's where we're going to be putting the collective energy on our side of the House. Patience before party, prevention as well as cure, backing our NHS, not running it down, and I urge the House to reject this motion.
Order. The question is order. The question is, as on the order paper, as many as that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Aye. Division, clear the lobbies. Order. The question is, as on the order paper. As many as that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tell us for the ayes, Bridget Phillipson and Tom Blenkinsop. Tell us for the noes, Guy Opperman and Jackie Law-Price. Front doors! Order! Order!
The ayes to the right, 270. The noes to the left, 309.
The ayes to the right, 270. The noes to the left, 309. The noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock.